Stay down. People like you do not get to explain first.
Most people had already decided what he was.
We already know enough.
To the store security guard, he was an easy target. To the assistant manager, he was the perfect excuse.
I knew something was wrong.
And to the shoppers passing by with their carts and baskets, he was just an uncomfortable scene they could pretend not to see.
This does not feel right.
You should have checked the cameras first.
He noticed the manager watching too carefully.
The truth is still here.
And the young cashier looking terrified because she remembered the truth.
He paid. I saw him pay.
That camera was not supposed to see that.
My version is the one they will believe.
They thought the story would end with a quiet man being blamed, embarrassed, and erased.
No receipt, no proof.
But the man on that floor had spent years protecting records from people who thought power gave them the right to rewrite reality. And before the grocery store ever learned, it had chosen the wrong man to destroy. That morning had begun in the kind of darkness most people never noticed. Not the frightening kind, not the kind that filled headlines, but the slow blue darkness before sunrise, when working people moved through the world while everyone else was still asleep. Marcus had finished mopping the fourth-floor hallway of the Bryan County Courthouse just after 5 in the morning. The courthouse was empty then, except for the hum of vending machines, the distant click of old pipes, and the soft squeak of his shoes against the marble floors. At 52, Marcus Hale had learned how to move through important buildings without being seen. He knew which doors stuck in winter, which judges arrived before sunrise, which clerks left coffee rings on polished desks, and which hallways held conversations people assumed no janitor would understand. He wore a faded charcoal hoodie over his maintenance shirt, dark work pants worn thin at the knees, and black shoes that had been repaired more times than replaced. To most people who passed him during the day, he was simply part of the building's background, like a trash bin, a mop bucket, or a light that flickered near the elevators. But Marcus had not always been invisible. Years earlier, before the courthouse had reduced him to a man with a mop, he had worked in the records division, the quiet room where evidence logs, video files, sealed documents, and time-stamped materials were handled with more care than most people ever imagined. Marcus had not been a lawyer, a judge, or a man with a title people respected in public, but he had been trusted with something more fragile than reputation. He had been trusted with the record, and to Marcus, the record was sacred. He believed a time stamp mattered. He believed a receipt mattered. He believed a camera angle, a signature, a missing minute on a file, or a note written in the margin could become the only thing standing between a person and a lie that looked official. He had seen what happened when powerful people treated paperwork like clay, shaping it until the truth became convenient. He had seen ordinary people lose jobs, children, homes, and names because someone with a cleaner suit and a louder voice wrote the first version of the story. That was why Marcus had lost his position. It had happened 7 years earlier, in a case that almost no one remembered now. A young man had claimed he had been mistreated during a detention incident, and the entire dispute came down to a hallway camera file and the time written in the evidence log. The file showed one thing. The amended report suggested another. A superior had asked Marcus to correct what they called a harmless clerical error. The tone had been casual, almost friendly, as if changing a number by 14 minutes was the same as fixing a typo. Marcus had refused. He had not shouted. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply said that the time on the file was the time on the file, and that his initials would not sit beside a lie. In a place like Bryan County, that kind of refusal did not always create a scandal. Sometimes it created something quieter and more efficient. His performance reviews changed. His attitude was questioned. His ability to work well with others became a concern. Within months, the man trusted to protect records was reassigned to building maintenance, and the courthouse learned to speak of him as difficult without ever explaining what he had been difficult about. Marcus accepted the new job because he needed to eat, because his wife Ruth needed medication, and because pride did not pay rent. But acceptance was not the same as forgetting. Every morning, as he pushed his mop past the locked records office, he remembered the kind of people who smiled while asking honest men to bend the truth. He remembered how quickly a room could turn against someone who refused to be useful to a lie. By 5:30 that morning, the first pale light had begun to press against the courthouse windows. Marcus rinsed the mop, folded the cleaning cloths, and checked the small black notebook he kept in his back pocket. It was not fancy. Its corners were soft from years of use, and its cover had been taped twice. Inside were work hours, grocery costs, medication reminders, appointment dates, and little notes written in a careful hand. Some people used phones for everything. Marcus still trusted paper, especially when paper was kept close. On the top line of that day's page, he had written Ruth's kidney appointment, Naya's birthday, and a short grocery list. Oat milk, bread, soup, apples, Ruth's prescription, blue cupcake. The cupcake mattered more than the price should have allowed. Nitya, Marcus's 12-year-old granddaughter, had asked for nothing big that year. She knew money was tight. She knew her grandmother had been tired. She knew her grandfather counted bills at the kitchen table when he thought no one was watching. So she had asked for one blue cupcake from the bakery case at the grocery store near the bus stop. The one with the bright frosting and tiny white sugar stars. Marcus had promised he would bring it home after work. That was the kind of promise a man like Marcus treated seriously. When he stepped out of the courthouse a little after 6, the town still looked half asleep. The sidewalks were wet from an overnight drizzle, and the streetlights gave the pavement a dull silver shine. Marcus pulled his hoodie tighter around his shoulders and walked toward the bus stop with the slow, careful pace of a man whose knees had carried too much for too long. He was tired, but not unhappy. There was a difference. Tired was the body asking for rest. Unhappy was the soul giving up. Marcus had not given up. At home, Ruth would still be asleep in the recliner because lying flat had become uncomfortable. Nia would be getting ready for school, pretending not to care too much about her birthday because she did not want to make anyone feel guilty. Marcus pictured the cupcake in its little plastic container, imagined placing it on the kitchen table, imagined Naya trying to hide her smile and failing. That small picture carried him through the cold morning better than coffee ever could. The grocery store was already open when he arrived. It was one of those clean, modern stores that tried to make ordinary things look expensive. The floors shone under fluorescent lights. The produce was stacked in bright pyramids. Soft music floated above the aisles, cheerful enough to make the place feel welcoming if a person did not know how quickly welcome could disappear. Marcus took a basket near the entrance and moved through the store with the careful focus of someone who knew exactly what he could spend. He chose the bread first because bread was cheaper near the back shelf. Then soup, apples, and oat milk. At the pharmacy counter, He waited quietly while a young clerk looked through the bins for Ruth's prescription. He did not complain about the wait. Marcus had spent too much of his life watching people unload their impatience onto workers who had no power over the system holding them up. When the prescription came, he checked the price, swallowed the worry it gave him, and added the receipt to his notebook. Near the bakery case, he paused longer than he meant to. The blue cupcake sat in the front row, exactly where Naya had described it, bright and almost ridiculous beneath the cold glass. For a second, Marcus felt the weight of the morning lift. It was a small thing, but small things were often where love survived when money could not do much else. He asked for one, watched it placed carefully into a little container, and paid for it separately, so it would not get crushed under the groceries. The cashier who helped him was young, with kind eyes, and the nervous energy of someone still learning how to stand up in a workplace that rewarded silence. Her name tag was there, but Marcus did not need to read it to understand her. He recognized that look, the look of a person who saw more than she said. She noticed his notebook when he tucked the receipt between the pages. She noticed that he thanked her like her work mattered. She noticed that he did not rush her, did not talk down to her, and did not treat the small transaction as beneath him. Later, that would matter. At the time, it was just another quiet kindness in a morning full of ordinary things. But from the customer service counter, Victor Rowe was watching. Victor was the assistant manager, the kind of man who had learned to make authority out of a vest and a clipped tone. He was not the owner. He was not even the store manager. But he had enough control over schedules, complaints, and shift reports to make younger employees fear him and tired customers avoid him. He liked that. It gave shape to a life that had not become as impressive as he once imagined it would. Victor had been under pressure for weeks. Inventory numbers were wrong. Premium items had gone missing. Corporate had started asking questions in careful emails that sounded polite only to people who had never been blamed for anything. Victor knew exactly why the numbers were wrong. He knew which products had been moved, which small thefts he had hidden, and which adjustments he had made to keep suspicion pointed away from himself. But pressure has a way of making dishonest people creative. He needed a story. Not a perfect story, because perfect stories invite inspection. He needed a believable one. A tired older man in worn clothes, a small basket, a separate bakery purchase, a store full of distracted shoppers, a private security lead who already believed the worst about certain people before facts arrived. To Victor, Marcus was not a customer. He was an opportunity. Marcus had no idea he had been chosen. He paid at the self-checkout for the groceries, moving slowly but carefully, scanning each item and placing it into the bagging area. The machine gave him trouble once with the apples, and he waited for assistance without irritation. The young cashier glanced over, helped clear the warning, and watched him finish the transaction. Marcus folded the receipt and placed it into his notebook with the pharmacy receipt and the bakery receipt. Then he set the cupcake on top of the bag, like something fragile enough to deserve its own space. As he turned toward the exit, Victor stepped away from the counter. The moment was almost invisible at first. A manager intercepting a customer near the front of the store was not unusual. A security lead drifting closer from the side aisle was not enough to make most people stop. Shoppers kept moving. Carts rolled. The automatic doors opened and closed with soft mechanical sighs. Everything about the scene looked normal from a distance, and that was what made it dangerous. Victor spoke with the practiced calm of a man performing concern for an audience. He suggested there had been a problem. He implied that Marcus needed to wait. He did not accuse him loudly at first. He was too careful for that. He wanted the attention to gather slowly, wanted people to see Marcus held in place before they heard why. Because once a person looks detained, the crowd begins inventing reasons. Marcus felt the change immediately. It was not fear first. It was recognition. The temperature of the room seemed to shift, not in the air, but in the way people looked at him. A woman near the cereal aisle slowed down. A man with a cart full of bottled water glanced once and then looked away. Someone whispered without knowing anything. The private security lid approached with his jaw set and his mind already made up. His name was Brent Calder, though Marcus did not know it yet. Calder had the posture of a man who believed firmness was the same as truth. He wore a plain dark security uniform, but he carried himself as if the store had given him a kingdom. He did not ask Marcus what happened. He asked Victor what the problem was, and that told Marcus everything about the direction the morning had taken. Victor produced a bag Marcus had never touched. It contained expensive items from a premium shelf, the kind of goods Marcus would not have bought even in a better month. The bag appeared from behind the counter, as if it had been waiting for its cue. Victor said enough for people nearby to understand that he believed Marcus had tried to leave without paying. He kept his voice measured, but there was satisfaction underneath it. He was not discovering a crime. He was presenting one. Marcus reached for his notebook. That small movement made Calder stiffen. The security lid told him not to reach around, not to make things harder, not to act like he could talk his way out of what they had already found. Marcus stopped, not because Calder was right, but because Marcus understood how quickly a normal gesture could be rewritten by someone determined to see danger. He kept his hands visible and explained, as calmly as he could, that he had receipts for everything he bought. But calm did not help him. Calm often angers people who depend on panic to prove their version of events. Calder wanted Marcus defensive. Victor wanted him confused. The crowd wanted him simple enough to categorize quickly. But Marcus stayed measured, and that quiet steadiness made the accusation feel less secure. So Victor added details. He mentioned the high-value items. He spoke of prior losses. He hinted that the store had been watching people like Marcus for weeks, though Marcus had never been part of any such thing. The young cashier heard that and looked up. She remembered the self-checkout. She remembered helping with the apples. She remembered the folded receipt. Her face changed with the first sharp edge of understanding, but fear held her in place. Victor controlled schedules. Victor wrote evaluations. Victor knew how to punish people without making it look like punishment. She was 19, new, and not yet sure courage would protect her from consequences. Marcus saw her hesitation and did not blame her. That was one of the things people misunderstood about the quiet. They assumed silence meant weakness or approval. But Marcus knew silence had many shapes. Some silence was cowardice. Some was survival. Some was the terrible pause before a person decided what kind of witness they were willing to become. Calder stepped closer. Victor stood behind him. The store kept moving around them, but differently now. Shoppers did not stop in a circle like people in movies. Real life was colder than that. They slowed, stared, judged, and kept shopping. A mother pulled her child gently toward another aisle. An older man pretended to compare prices on canned beans while listening to every word. A teenager lifted his phone, then lowered it when Calder looked his way. The humiliation did not need a crowd gathered tightly around it. It only needed enough people to see and choose comfort over truth. Marcus asked them to check the cameras. That should have been the simplest request in the world. In a store with cameras above registers, doors, aisles, and counters, a customer asking for footage should have sounded reasonable. But lies do not like neutral witnesses. Victor's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Calder dismissed the request as if it were a trick. He said the matter was already clear enough, and Victor nodded too quickly. Marcus noticed that too. He noticed the nod. He noticed the security lead standing between him and the exit. He noticed Victor's eyes cutting once toward the freezer aisle and then away. He noticed the young cashier pressing her lips together, as if the truth were physically hurting her. Most of all, he noticed the small red light above the freezer case. It was not one of the obvious store cameras mounted in black domes from the ceiling. It was smaller, placed near a service panel, the kind installed by an outside maintenance company to monitor temperature access and after-hours service. Marcus had seen hundreds of cameras in his old job. He knew the difference between a camera controlled by a building and one maintained by a vendor. He knew that sometimes the most important witness was the one powerful people forgot existed. For the first time that morning, Victor had chosen the wrong man. Not because Marcus was rich, he was not. Not because Marcus had influence, he had very little. Not because anyone in that store was ready to protect him. Most were not. Victor had chosen the wrong man because Marcus understood records the way other people understood weather. He could feel when a story was being built against him. He knew where to look for the thing that would survive after voices finished lying. Still, knowledge did not save him from shame. Calder's voice grew harder. Victor's expression became more wounded and official, as if he were the victim of Marcus's refusal to accept guilt. The cupcake slipped from the top of the grocery bag during the confusion and landed near the wheel of a shopping cart. No one meant to crush it, or maybe no one cared enough to stop it from being crushed. The little blue frosting smeared across the clear plastic lid, and for one painful second, Marcus thought not of the accusation, not of the security guard, not of the watching shoppers, but of Nia. He had promised her. That was the detail that almost broke him. Not the embarrassment, not the way people looked at him, not even the false accusation. Marcus had survived worse things than public judgment. But the cupcake on the floor, bright blue and ruined under fluorescent light, carried a cruelty no report would ever capture. It was proof that lies do not only attack the accused, they reach outward. They touch birthdays, kitchens, sick wives, children waiting at home, and every small hope a tired person has carried through the morning. Marcus lowered his eyes, not in surrender, but to steady himself. He had learned long ago that anger, when displayed by the wrong person in the wrong room, becomes evidence for the other side. So he swallowed it. He let his breathing slow. He kept his face as calm as he could, while the people around him mistook restraint for guilt. Inside, however, he was already preserving the morning, the time, the aisle, the position of the cupcake, the order of the receipts, the camera above the freezer, the cashier's face, Victor's glance, Calder's words. A record could begin in the mind before it reached paper. By the time Marcus was finally led away from the front of the store and into the small back office, the public part of the humiliation had already done its damage. People would remember him as the man stopped near the exit. Some would tell themselves they had seen stolen goods. though they had only seen a bag Victor produced. Others would remember the security guard's confidence and mistake it for proof. A few would feel uneasy later, maybe while unloading groceries at home. But uneasiness was not the same as testimony. In the back office, Victor's performance changed. Without the shoppers nearby, his concern became impatience. Calder began writing an internal incident note before Marcus had finished explaining. That detail mattered. A fair record listens before it writes. A false one arrives with blank spaces already shaped like conclusions. Marcus asked again for the cameras to be checked. He asked for the self-checkout record, the bakery purchase, the pharmacy receipt, and the freezer camera near the service panel. Each request made Victor more uncomfortable. Calder, however, treated the details as noise. To him, certainty was easier than accuracy. He had already decided which man in the room deserved belief. Marcus was eventually released from the office, but not cleared. That was another kind of cruelty. They did not need to hold him forever to damage him. They only needed to let him leave under a cloud, with his groceries disturbed, his cupcake ruined, and his name attached to an accusation that could follow him in ways no apology could fully undo. Victor kept the premium item bag. Calder kept copies of what he claimed mattered. The receipts Marcus had placed in his notebook were no longer where they had been. That was when the morning became more than humiliation. Marcus noticed the missing receipts before he reached the bus stop. He stood under the gray morning sky with the grocery bag hanging from one hand and the ruined cupcake container in the other. His fingers moved through the notebook once, then again, slowly. The pharmacy slip was still there, tucked between 2 pages. The small list was still there. But the grocery receipt and bakery receipt were gone. For a moment, he simply stood still. A younger man might have rushed back into the store. An angrier man might have shouted. A more naive man might have assumed it was a mistake. Marcus did none of those things. He looked back at the bright entrance, at the shoppers moving in and out as if nothing important had happened there. And he understood that the story had not ended when they let him walk away. It had just become harder to prove. He took out his pen and wrote down the time. That was the first thing Marcus did. Standing beneath the bus stop shelter with the ruined cupcake in one hand and the grocery bag in the other. He wrote the hour, the weather, the number of the checkout lane, the color of the manager's vest, the position of the freezer camera, and the exact moment he realized the receipts were missing. He did not write with trembling anger. He wrote with the careful discipline of a man who had learned that memory becomes stronger when it is anchored to details. The bus came 10 minutes later. Marcus sat near the back, holding the grocery bag close to his knees. People boarded around him with their phones, lunch bags, tired faces, and ordinary morning thoughts. No one knew that the man in the faded hoodie had just been publicly accused, humiliated, and quietly robbed of the very proof that could clear him. That was another cruelty of injustice. The world did not stop for it. Traffic moved. Coffee was poured. School doors opened. People complained about weather and schedules, while someone else's life had already been pushed off balance. Marcus kept looking at the cupcake. The plastic container had cracked on one corner. The blue frosting had smeared against the lid, and the little white sugar stars were pressed into a shapeless mess. It was still technically a cupcake, but it no longer looked like something a grandfather could place proudly in front of a birthday girl. It looked like evidence of carelessness, as if he had failed at the one small thing Nia had asked from him. That thought hurt more than the accusation. When Marcus reached the apartment, The sun had risen enough to make the windows look pale. Ruth was awake in the recliner, wrapped in the old brown blanket she insisted was still good, even though the edges had begun to fray. Illness had made her movement slower, but it had not taken the sharpness from her eyes. She knew Marcus's face before he said anything. Wives who have survived hard years learn to read silence the way others read headlines. Nia was at the kitchen table with her backpack open and one shoe untied, pretending to study a worksheet while secretly watching the door. She was trying to act older than 12. Children in houses with medical bills often learn that trick early. They learn to make their hopes smaller, to ask for less, to smile quickly when adults look tired. But when she saw the damaged cupcake container in Marcus's hand, the pretending fell away. Marcus placed the groceries on the table gently. He apologized without making excuses. He told Nia that something had happened at the store, that the cupcake had been damaged, and that he would make it right. He did not tell the whole story immediately. Not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he could not bear to place the ugliness of that morning directly into her birthday, before she had even gone to school. But Nia saw more than he wanted her to see. She saw the way his fingers moved carefully, as if his wrist was sore. She saw the tightness around his mouth. She saw Ruth sit up straighter, suddenly alert. And she saw the black notebook on the table, open to a page filled with notes that did not look like a grocery list anymore. Ruth asked what they had done to him. Marcus could have softened it. He could have blamed confusion, policy, a misunderstanding, anything that made the world feel less intentional. But marriage had never survived between them on comfortable lies. So he told her enough. He told her that the assistant manager had accused him of taking items he never touched. He told her the security lead refused to check the receipts properly. He told her the crowd watched, and the young cashier looked as if she wanted to speak, but was afraid. He told her that the receipts were missing now, and that a service camera above the freezer might have seen what mattered. The room became very quiet. Ruth closed her eyes, not because she was surprised, but because some pain returns wearing new clothes. She had watched Marcus lose his records job years earlier for refusing to change a timestamp. She had watched people who barely knew him call him difficult, proud, stubborn, impossible. She had watched him take maintenance work with a straight back and a broken heart, because their family needed him more than his pride did. Now, years later, the same pattern had found him in a grocery store. A person with power had written a story, and Marcus had been placed inside it without permission. Nia did not cry right away. She stared at the ruined cupcake, then at her grandfather's notebook, then at his face. In that moment, something shifted in her. Childhood did not end all at once, but sometimes it lost a layer in a single morning. She began to understand that unfairness was not always loud enough for strangers to recognize. Sometimes it happened under fluorescent lights, while people kept shopping. Sometimes it wore a polite vest. Sometimes it spoke in a calm voice and counted on everyone else being too busy to care. Marcus wanted her to go to school. Nia wanted to stay home. Ruth settled the matter in the way she often did, with tenderness wrapped around steel. She told Nia that going to school did not mean forgetting, and staying home would not undo what had happened. Then she told Marcus to sit down and eat something before he started trying to carry the whole burden alone. That was Ruth. Even sick, she could still place order around pain. After Nia left, Marcus and Ruth sat at the kitchen table with the notebook between them. Marcus reconstructed everything from the moment he entered the store. Ruth wrote on a separate sheet while he spoke. She asked practical questions. the kind that forced memory to sharpen. Which register had he used? Which cashier helped with the apples? Was the bakery receipt printed separately? Where exactly had Victor stood? Which side of the freezer aisle held the small service camera? Did the security lead touch the groceries before or after the accusation became public? Did anyone else handle the notebook? Marcus answered carefully. He knew the danger of certainty when memory was still fresh and wounded. He did not exaggerate. He did not fill gaps with guesses. He marked what he knew, what he believed, and what needed proof. That distinction mattered. Lies often win by pretending confidence is the same as truth. Marcus had spent his life refusing that mistake. By mid-morning, Ruth had made one decision. They needed Grace Whitmore. Grace was not family by blood, but she had known Marcus long enough to understand what had happened to him the first time the courthouse turned on him. She was a civil rights attorney, with silver in her hair, patience in her voice, and a reputation for making institutions regret underestimating quiet people. Grace did not chase every rumor, and she did not make promises she could not keep. But when she believed a record had been manipulated, she moved quickly, because she knew evidence had a shelf life when guilty people controlled the shelves. Marcus did not want to call her at first. That was not pride exactly. It was exhaustion. He had been through the machinery before. He knew what it meant to become a case. He knew how people would examine his clothes, his job, his tone, his past, his finances, his family, and his anger. He knew they would ask why he did not act differently, why he did not speak louder, why he did not stay calmer, why he did not produce proof before the proof disappeared. Victims are often put on trial long before anyone admits a wrong has been done. But Ruth reminded him that silence had already cost him once. She did not say it cruelly. She said it as someone who had carried the same wound. The first time Marcus lost his position, they had tried to survive quietly. They had hoped that being honorable would be enough. It had not restored his title. It had not corrected the whispers. It had not taught the people who punished him to fear the truth. This time, Ruth said, they would not hand the lie a quiet room to grow in. So Marcus called Grace. He gave the facts simply. He did not dramatize the humiliation. He did not begin with outrage. He began with the missing receipts and the service camera. That told Grace everything she needed to know about the man on the other end of the phone. Many people call lawyers with feelings first. Marcus called with a chain of custody forming in his mind. Grace listened without interrupting. Then she asked for times, names, descriptions, and any proof still in his possession. When Marcus mentioned the freezer service camera, there was a pause, not of confusion, but of recognition. Grace knew the value of a camera controlled outside the place where the lie had begun. She told Marcus not to contact the store again on his own, not to post anything, not to threaten anyone, and not to let anger give them a distraction. The first move, she said, had to be preservation. Within the hour, Grace's office sent formal preservation notices to the grocery store, the outside refrigeration company, the security contractor, and the pharmacy system connected to the purchase records. The letters demanded that all footage, transaction logs, incident notes, internal communications, and registered data from that morning be retained. They were not loud letters. They did not need to be. They carried the quiet force of someone who knew exactly where evidence liked to disappear. That was the first turn in the story. At the grocery store, Victor received the notice before lunch. He read it once in the small back office. Then he read it again, slower. His face changed, not because the letter accused him directly, but because it named things he had hoped no one would think to name. The freezer camera, the external maintenance vendor, the transaction logs, the incident note, the preserved receipts, the time window. Victor had expected Marcus to complain, maybe to call the store manager, maybe even to shout into a phone and be dismissed as emotional. He had not expected preservation language. He had not expected a lawyer to move before the end of the workday. Most of all, he had not expected the camera above the freezer case to become important. That little camera had always annoyed him. It belonged to the refrigeration maintenance company, not the store's main security system. It existed because expensive freezer failures could ruin inventory overnight, and corporate did not like losing money to broken equipment. It recorded service access, temperature checks, and movement around the freezer doors. Victor had ignored it because it was not part of the camera system he usually reviewed. It was just another small device with a blinking red light, too ordinary to fear. Now he feared it. Calder did too, though he showed it differently. The private security lead did not panic. Men like Calder rarely panic in a way others can see. Instead, he became more certain, more rigid, more offended that anyone would question his handling of the incident. He told himself the matter would hold because Victor had made the initial complaint and Marcus had looked suspicious. He repeated that phrase in his head until it felt almost like evidence. Looked suspicious. It was one of the most dangerous phrases in the world because it often revealed more about the person looking than the person being judged. By the end of that day, the store manager had been informed. Corporate had been informed. The outside maintenance vendor had been contacted. The incident had moved from a small back office into email threads, where careful people began choosing careful words. No one wanted to admit fault. No one wanted to accuse Victor too quickly. No one wanted to believe that a private security lead had helped bury receipts, or that an assistant manager had created a false accusation to distract from missing inventory. Institutions rarely begin by searching for truth. They begin by searching for exposure. At home, Marcus waited. Waiting was harder than writing the time, harder than calling Grace, harder even than walking out of the store with strangers' judgment still clinging to his back. Waiting gave the mind too much room. He imagined the footage being deleted. He imagined the vendor saying the camera had not recorded. He imagined Victor explaining everything away, Calder doubling down, the cashier staying silent, and the story becoming another fog of maybe and maybe not. Ruth watched him pace the small living room until his knees started bothering him. Then she told him to sit. He did, not because pacing was useless, but because Ruth had always been better at making commands sound like care. Nia came home from school quieter than usual. She had told no one about the cupcake. She had not eaten the lunch Ruth packed. She had spent the day thinking about the way her grandfather wrote things down, about the receipts missing from the notebook, about the cashier who had seen the truth and said nothing in time. Children often understand injustice in simpler language than adults. To Nia, the question was not complicated. Her grandfather had paid. Someone lied. People watched. The proof had to be found. That evening, she sat beside Marcus with the damaged cupcake container between them. He had tried to buy another one from a different bakery on the way home, but the store had only plain vanilla left, and something in him refused to pretend replacement was the same as repair. Nia surprised him by touching the cracked container gently and saying it still counted because he had tried. Marcus looked away then, because Grace from a child can break a man more completely than cruelty from an adult. He promised her again that he would make it right. But even as he said it, he knew making it right would not mean only replacing a cupcake. It would mean pulling a lie into the light. It would mean forcing people who had looked away to look again. It would mean entering the machinery he had spent years avoiding, and trusting that this time, the record might be stronger than the people trying to bend it. The next morning, Grace called. Her voice was controlled, but Marcus heard the energy beneath it. The maintenance company had confirmed the freezer camera existed. It had recorded continuously that morning. Better yet, the footage was stored through the vendor's cloud system, not the grocery store's local office. The store could request access, but it could not quietly erase the original. The files were being preserved. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to breathe fully. Grace warned him that preserved did not mean won. Footage had to be reviewed. Angles could disappoint. People could claim context. Lawyers could make simple truths look complicated if they had enough time and money. But she also told him the camera covered part of the aisle near the freezer and part of the path behind the customer service counter. That was enough to matter. Maybe enough to change everything. 2 days later, Grace asked Marcus to come to her office. Ruth insisted on going with him. Naya insisted too, but Marcus hesitated. He wanted to protect her from seeing the worst parts again. Ruth gently reminded him that Naya had already seen the ruined cupcake, the trembling hands, and the silence after. Protecting children did not always mean hiding truth from them. Sometimes it meant letting them see truth handled properly. Grace's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. It smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and raincoats drying near the door. Nothing about it was flashy. The chairs did not match. The shelves were crowded. The walls held framed certificates, community awards, and photographs of people who looked as if they had once arrived there with their names damaged and left with them restored. Grace greeted Marcus with both warmth and focus. She did not pity him. Marcus appreciated that. Pity can make a person feel small, even when it is kindly meant. Grace treated him like a witness to his own life, a man whose memory mattered. She placed a folder on the table, then turned her laptop so the family could see the screen. The first clip was from the self-checkout. It showed Marcus scanning the bread, soup, apples, and oat milk. It showed the young cashier assisting him when the machine paused. It showed Marcus finishing the purchase and placing the receipt into his notebook. The angle was distant, but clear enough. Grace did not speak over it. She let the truth occupy the room without decoration. Ruth's hand found Marcus's under the table. The second clip showed the bakery counter. Marcus paid separately. The cupcake was placed in its container. The receipt was printed. Marcus tucked it away. Nia watched that part with her lips pressed tight, as if she were trying not to feel too much in front of adults. The cupcake, before it was ruined, looked bright and small and innocent. Then came the freezer camera. The footage was not beautiful. It was high, slightly wide, and colder in color than the store's main cameras. But it saw what mattered. It saw Victor near the premium shelf before Marcus ever entered that aisle. It saw him handling the bag of expensive items. It saw him place the bag behind the customer service counter, out of the normal customer path. It saw Marcus pass by later without touching those items at all. Grace paused the video there. No one said anything. Then she let it continue. The camera did not show every angle of the confrontation, but it showed enough. Victor brought the bag forward after Marcus had paid. Calder stepped in. Marcus reached toward his notebook, then stopped. The crowd shifted around them. The young cashier looked over from the self-checkout station. The cupcake fell. A shopping cart wheel caught the edge of the container and crushed it as the shopper moved past, unaware or unwilling to stop. Nia made a small sound then. Marcus reached for her hand, but his eyes stayed on the screen. The final clip showed the back hallway. It was not from the freezer camera, but from another angle Grace had obtained through the preservation demand. It showed Calder alone after the incident, holding folded slips of paper. It showed him place them into his pocket instead of attaching them to the incident materials. It did not capture his thoughts. It did not need to. Some actions are plain enough when placed beside the truth they were meant to hide. Grace closed the laptop. The office felt different after that. Not triumphant. Not yet. Truth, when finally seen, does not always bring immediate joy. Sometimes it brings grief first, because it proves the pain was real, the suspicion was manufactured, and the humiliation did not have to happen. Ruth was the first to speak, but her words were less a question than a verdict. They had known it. Now the record knew it too. Marcus sat very still. For years, people had told him in different ways that records were cold things, that paperwork had no soul, that video could not understand dignity, that timestamps were technical details. But in Grace's office, watching the lie unravel frame by frame, Marcus felt again why he had once sacrificed his position over 14 minutes. The record could not love him. It could not comfort Nia. It could not undo Ruth's worry or restore the cupcake. But it could refuse to forget. And sometimes refusing to forget is where justice begins. Grace explained the next steps. They would not simply release the most shocking clip and hope public anger did the rest. That was how stories became noise. They would build the timeline first. The self-checkout receipt, the bakery purchase, the pharmacy record, the freezer camera, the back hallway footage, the missing slips, the internal note written before Marcus's explanation was complete, the cashier's statement, if she could find the courage to give one, the prior inventory discrepancies connected to Victor. Marcus listened carefully. He was relieved, but he was not naive. He knew the other side would respond. Victor would claim confusion. Calder would claim procedure. Corporate would claim concern. Someone would say the footage lacked context, even though the whole lie had depended on denying context in the first place. Someone would say Marcus should have been more cooperative. Someone would say the security lead was only doing his job. Someone would say mistakes happen. Grace knew all of that too. That was why she looked at Marcus and told him they would not let the case become a debate about his attitude. They would make it about the record. Not feelings first. Not outrage first. The record first. Because once the record was clear, the feelings would know where to stand. Before they left the office, Nia asked if the video meant everyone would believe him now. It was the kind of question only a child could ask with such painful innocence. Grace did not lie to her. She said some people believe truth when they see it. Some people resist it because it costs them something. And some people only believe it when everyone else does. That was why truth needed witnesses, documents, pressure, and courage all at once. Nia nodded as if she understood more than anyone wanted her to. On the way home, Marcus looked out the bus window at the grocery store when they passed it. Through the glass, he could see shoppers moving under bright lights, pushing carts, comparing prices, choosing cereal, buying flowers, living inside the comfort of ordinary errands. The building looked the same. That bothered him for reasons he could not fully explain. A place where a lie had been built should have looked different afterward. It should have carried a mark. But buildings rarely confess. People have to make them. That night, Grace began preparing the release. Not a reckless post. Not an emotional accusation thrown into the internet. A structured statement with timestamps, preserved footage, transaction confirmation, and a clear demand for accountability. She contacted the store's corporate office again, this time with enough attached proof to make denial dangerous. She contacted the security contractor. She prepared to contact local media if they chose silence over action. Victor did not sleep much that night. Neither did Calder. But Marcus did, for the first time since the morning in the store. Not deeply, not without waking once to check the notebook on the bedside table, but enough to let his body rest. He had spent years believing the truth mattered even when nobody thanked him for protecting it. Now, at last, the truth had begun protecting him back. By sunrise, the story was no longer just his memory. It was a timeline. It was footage. It was receipts. It was a young cashier deciding whether fear would own her voice. It was a granddaughter learning that dignity sometimes needed documents beside it. And it was a quiet man in a faded hoodie, standing at the edge of a fight he never wanted, realizing that the people who tried to erase him had left their own fingerprints all over the lie. Grace did not release the evidence that afternoon. She knew better than to throw truth into the world before giving it a spine. A raw clip could be twisted. A single angle could be questioned. A few seconds could become entertainment, argument, or noise. What Marcus needed was not noise. He needed a record so complete that every excuse would have to walk past its own reflection before reaching the public. So, Grace built the timeline carefully. She placed Marcus's notebook beside the self-checkout log. She placed the bakery receipt beside the footage of the cupcake purchase. She placed the pharmacy time beside the bus schedule. She placed Victor's movement near the premium shelf beside the moment the planted bag appeared at the counter. She placed Calder's internal incident note beside the video, showing that the note had been written before Marcus's explanation had been properly recorded. Then she placed the missing receipts beside the back hallway footage, where folded slips of paper moved into the wrong hands and out of the official story. By the time she finished, the lie no longer looked like a misunderstanding. It looked designed. Marcus sat across from her while she reviewed it all, his hands folded around the black notebook he had carried for years. Ruth sat beside him, quiet but steady. Naya sat closer than usual, not because she was afraid of the office, but because she wanted her grandfather to feel that he wasn't standing alone anymore. On the screen, the grocery store looked ordinary. Bright lights, clean floors, carts, a bakery case, people moving through their errands. And inside all that ordinary brightness, a lie had been placed like a trap. That was what made the footage so disturbing. No one had needed darkness. No one had needed an alley, a locked room, or a dramatic threat. The harm had happened in public, under lights, beside shelves of cereal and bread, while ordinary shoppers decided the scene was none of their business. Grace understood that this was the part people would recognize. Not everyone had been falsely accused in a grocery store, but many people knew what it felt like to be judged before being heard. Many knew what it meant for a confident person with a title to be believed faster than a quiet person with proof. Before releasing anything, Grace gave the store one final chance. Her letter was direct. She told corporate that the footage, transaction records, witness information, and preserved notes confirmed Marcus had paid for his items, had not touched the premium goods, and had been falsely accused in a way that caused public humiliation and emotional harm. She demanded a public correction, an apology naming the wrong, immediate action against Victor, full disclosure from the security contractor, protection for the cashier, and compensation that recognized not only the ruined groceries, but the damage to Marcus's dignity. The response came the next morning. It was polished, careful, and empty. Corporate expressed concern. They said they were reviewing the matter. They asked for patience. They claimed they wanted to avoid rushing to judgment, even though their employees had rushed to judgment when Marcus was the one on the floor. They did not name Victor's conduct. They did not admit the receipts had been removed. They did not apologize to Marcus directly. Most of all, they asked Grace not to release anything publicly while their internal review continued. Grace read the email once, then set it down. Marcus did not need her to explain. He had heard that language before. It was the language of institutions buying time, hoping fatigue would do what denial could not. It was the same kind of smooth language that had followed him out of the records division 7 years earlier, when refusing to change a timestamp had somehow become a question about attitude and teamwork. The words were different, but the shape was familiar. This time Marcus did not bend. He gave Grace permission to release the evidence. The statement went out that evening. It was not emotional in the way people expected. It did not beg for sympathy. It did not decorate pain. It laid out the morning with timestamps, receipts, preserved footage, and a clear explanation of what the video showed. It said Marcus had been falsely accused after paying for his groceries. It said a store manager had introduced items Marcus never handled. It said a private security lead had ignored available proof. It said receipts later disappeared from Marcus's notebook. It said the freezer service camera, forgotten by the people who built the lie, had preserved the truth. For the first hour, only a few people noticed. A local reporter shared it, then a community organizer, then a courthouse employee who remembered Marcus from the records division and wrote that he had once been punished for protecting evidence too carefully. That one sentence changed the temperature of the story. People began looking more closely. They watched the clip of Victor placing the bag. They watched Marcus paying at the self-checkout. They watched the cupcake fall and be crushed while people continued shopping. They watched the young cashier's face as she realized what was happening. And then they watched Marcus, calm, humiliated, and observant, noticing the camera no one else remembered. By midnight, the store's silence had become louder than any statement it could have issued. The next morning, news vans arrived outside the grocery store. Corporate closed the entrance for an hour and called it a security concern. Employees were told not to speak to reporters. Victor did not come to work. Calder's contractor announced that he had been placed on leave pending review. The store manager released a short message about taking the allegations seriously, but by then, the public had seen enough polished language to recognize fear wearing a suit. The cashier came forward that afternoon. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She was 19, still new enough to believe that doing a job well might protect her, and old enough to realize that workplaces often protect power before truth. She contacted Grace first because she was terrified of losing her job. Grace took her statement privately and made sure she understood what could happen. Lena said Marcus paid. She said she helped clear the self-checkout warning. She said she saw him place the receipt into his notebook. She said Victor had been unusually focused on Marcus before the accusation. She said she wanted to speak earlier, but fear had locked her throat. Marcus did not condemn her for that fear. He knew how fear worked when the person above you controlled your schedule, your hours, and your ability to pay rent. He also knew that courage delayed was not the same as courage denied. Lena had come forward before the lie could fully settle. That mattered. Her statement pushed the story further. Other employees began to talk. One remembered Victor moving premium items near the stockroom on previous shifts. Another remembered inventory reports that never seemed to match what workers saw. A third said Victor had warned employees not to question management decisions in front of customers. Piece by piece, the image of a concerned assistant manager collapsed. What appeared in its place was a man protecting himself by creating suspicion around someone else. Corporate suspended Victor officially by the end of the week. The word suspended did not satisfy Nia. She wanted stronger words. She wanted fired, exposed, punished, named. Marcus understood her anger, but he had learned that justice often moved slower than the wound. It did not mean it was not moving. Grace reminded the family that the first fall of a powerful person is rarely the final consequence. It is only the moment when distance begins. People who were once protected by institutions suddenly become liabilities to them. That was happening to Victor now. Calder tried to defend himself. Through the security contractor, he claimed he had acted based on the information provided by store management. He claimed Marcus had been uncooperative. He claimed the scene was tense. He claimed his decisions were reasonable under the circumstances. But the footage weakened every sentence. It showed Marcus calm. It showed the receipts. It showed Calder ignoring requests to verify the purchases. It showed him writing the internal note in a way that placed conclusion before investigation. The more Calder explained, the worse he looked. Grace filed the lawsuit before the public conversation could fade. The complaint named the grocery store, Victor, the private security contractor, and Calder. It described false accusation, negligent supervision, intentional emotional harm, mishandling of proof, and a pattern of conduct that allowed a low-status customer to be treated as guilty because it was convenient. But the most powerful part of the complaint wasn't legal language. It was the story of a man who had spent years protecting records from manipulation, only to be nearly destroyed by people who assumed no one would check the record. That part traveled. Church leaders repeated it. Local teachers discussed it with older students. Workers at the courthouse whispered about it in elevators. People who had once ignored Marcus while he mopped their hallway began remembering that he had been more than a maintenance worker. Some remembered him from the records division. Some remembered his quiet refusal to alter a time entry years earlier. A few remembered how quickly he had disappeared from that department afterward. Then came the envelope. It arrived at Grace's office with no return address. Inside were copies of old courthouse documents, performance reviews from before Marcus's refusal, all positive. Notes from after his refusal, suddenly critical. Internal emails discussing his lack of flexibility, a memo suggesting reassignment, and a copy of the disputed time entry request that had cost him his position without ever being called punishment. Grace studied the papers for a long time. They did not directly say the courthouse had retaliated. Documents created by careful people rarely confess so openly. But the pattern was there. Before Marcus refused to alter the record, he was reliable, precise, trusted, and professional. After he refused, he became difficult, resistant, and not a good fit. The words had been chosen to hide the truth, but the dates placed them under a light they could not escape. When Marcus saw the documents, he did not smile. Vindication is not always joyful. Sometimes, it feels like standing in front of an old wound and realizing it was exactly as deep as you remembered. For 7 years, Marcus had carried the weight of being quietly demoted, while others called it complicated. Now the paper said what his heart had known. He had not lost his place because he failed the work. He had lost it because he respected the work more than the people above him did. Nia read the documents at the kitchen table. This time, she cried openly. Not because of the grocery store, but because she understood that her grandfather's suffering had a history. The ruined cupcake had been painful. The false accusation had been cruel. But the old records showed something larger. Marcus had been paying for honesty long before she was old enough to understand the cost. The lawsuit changed after that. Grace added the old courthouse documents, not as a separate fight, but as context for who Marcus was and why the grocery store's assumption had been so wrong. He was not a man inventing a story after being embarrassed. He was a man with a documented history of protecting truth, even when truth punished him. The very quality Victor and Calder had mistaken for weakness was the thing that made Marcus dangerous to their lie. Discovery began. That was when the defendants lost control. Emails showed Victor had been warned about inventory discrepancies before Marcus entered the store. Schedule notes showed he had been alone near the premium goods before the accusation. Transaction records confirmed Marcus paid. Internal messages showed corporate employees worrying less about Marcus's innocence and more about exposure. Calder's incident note had inconsistencies that grew sharper when placed beside video timestamps. The more documents Grace collected, the more the defense shifted from denial to minimization. They began calling it a mistake. Grace called it a sequence. A mistake is one wrong turn. A sequence is a path. Victor moving the goods, watching Marcus, producing the bag, ignoring the request for camera review, allowing the public accusation, and participating in the removal of receipts was not a single misunderstanding. Calder accepting Victor's version, dismissing Marcus's receipts, documenting guilt before verification, and keeping proof out of the record was not one bad moment. The harm was built step by step, and every step had a person standing on it. Victor broke first. In deposition, he tried to sound offended. He said he was protecting the store. He said inventory pressure had made everyone alert. He said Marcus had seemed suspicious because he moved slowly, kept looking around, and carried a notebook. Grace let him say all of it. Then she placed the video stills in front of him one by one. Victor near the premium shelf. Victor carrying the bag. Victor placing it behind the counter. Victor watching Marcus. Victor producing the bag after Marcus had paid. Victor looking toward the freezer aisle when Marcus asked for cameras. By the end, Victor's confidence had drained out of him. He admitted that he had handled the bag before the accusation. Then he admitted he had not seen Marcus touch those items. Then he admitted he had been under pressure over missing inventory. Each admission came smaller than the last, as if the truth had to be dragged out through his teeth. But it came. Calder lasted longer. He was the kind of man who had built his self-image around certainty, and certainty can become a locked room. He insisted he had acted reasonably. He insisted Marcus's calmness had seemed calculated. He insisted the situation required control. Grace asked him whether control mattered more than accuracy. He avoided the question. She asked whether he had checked the receipts before writing the incident note. He did not answer directly. She asked whether a person in plain clothes was easier for him to doubt than a manager in a vest. That question stayed in the room long after his lawyer objected. The case did not reach a full public trial. That disappointed some people, but Grace told Marcus that justice was not measured only by courtroom drama. After the depositions, after the documents, after the public pressure, and after the security contractor realized Calder had become impossible to defend cleanly, the defendants asked for mediation. Marcus did not want a quiet settlement that buried the truth. Grace made that clear before the first meeting began. No agreement would exist without public correction. That became the line. The final resolution came with money, but money was not the heart of it. The store issued a public statement acknowledging that Marcus had paid for his purchases, had been wrongly accused, and had been treated in a way that violated basic standards of dignity and fairness. Victor was terminated. The company referred his conduct related to inventory manipulation for further review. Calder was dismissed by the security contractor and later lost his license to work in private security after the review board found he had mishandled the incident and failed to preserve customer proof. The store agreed to retrain employees, revise accusation procedures, protect workers who came forward, and require immediate preservation of footage when a customer disputed an accusation. Grace also secured something Marcus had not expected. A correction letter was sent to the courthouse leadership, accompanied by the old documents and the public record of the grocery case. It did not force the county to rewrite history completely, but it forced them to acknowledge that Marcus's prior work and records had been professional, careful, and respected before the disputed reassignment. It also led to a small public recognition from a county oversight committee, praising the importance of evidence integrity and naming Marcus as someone who had upheld that principle. It was not everything, but it was not nothing. The ceremony was small. Marcus almost did not attend. He did not trust ceremonies easily. Too many institutions used plaques to cover the cracks they refused to repair. But Ruth told him that Nia needed to see the room say his name correctly. So he went. He wore his best jacket, the one Ruth had brushed twice that morning. Nia stood beside him with her shoulders straight. Grace stood in the back, watching like a person who had seen many victories and knew none of them arrived clean. When Marcus's name was spoken, he did not feel pride first. He felt the younger version of himself standing somewhere inside him, the man who had refused to change 14 minutes, and then walked out of the records division with his future quietly damaged. He wished that man could have known this moment would come. Not because it would undo the loss, but because it would prove the loss had not been meaningless. Afterward, Nia asked if he felt better. Marcus told her the truth in the gentlest way he could. He felt lighter, but not untouched. There are some things justice repairs, and some things it can only honor. The public apology did not erase the grocery store floor. The settlement did not uncrush the cupcake. Victor's termination did not give back the years Marcus had spent being treated like a man who had fallen because of his own attitude. But the lie had not won. That mattered. The record had held. A week later, Marcus returned to the grocery store. He went alone first. Ruth wanted to come. Nia wanted to come. Grace advised him not to push himself. But Marcus knew there was a difference between avoiding a wound and letting it own the map of your life. He needed to walk through those doors again under his own power. The store looked the same and different. The floors still shone. The lights still hummed. Customers still moved through the aisles with baskets and carts. But near the customer service counter, Victor was gone. Near the entrance, a new sign explained customer verification procedures without naming the case. Employees glanced at Marcus with recognition, some embarrassed, some respectful. Lena saw him from the self-checkout station and froze for half a second before stepping forward. She did not offer a dramatic apology in front of everyone. She did something better. She treated him carefully, normally, respectfully. She asked if he needed help finding anything. Marcus thanked her. That was all. Sometimes restoration is not a speech. Sometimes it is the ordinary courtesy that should have been there from the beginning. He walked to the bakery case. There, behind the glass, was a row of blue cupcakes with white sugar stars. Marcus looked at them for a long time. The worker behind the counter waited without rushing him. Finally, he bought one, then another. Then a small box of 4, because this time he could afford to bring enough home for everyone. He paid, took the receipt, looked at it, and placed it into his notebook. At home, Naya laughed when she saw the box. Not because the old pain was funny, but because joy had returned to a place where humiliation had once tried to settle. Ruth made tea. Grace came by later with documents for Marcus to sign, but stayed for a cupcake because Naya insisted. They did not pretend everything was simple now. Ruth still had appointments. Bills still arrived. Marcus still worked hard. The world had not transformed into fairness overnight, but something inside the family had changed. Nia no longer saw her grandfather as only a tired man who worked before sunrise. She saw him as someone who had protected truth even when truth cost him. Ruth no longer had to carry the old courthouse wound in silence. Grace no longer had to wonder whether the system that punished Marcus would ever be forced to face even a small part of what it had done. And Marcus, though still humble, no longer moved through the world quite as invisibly as before. With part of the settlement, he started a small fund. He named it the Hale Evidence Integrity Fund, though Nia teased him for choosing such a serious name. The fund helped ordinary people preserve records quickly when they were accused by employers, landlords, stores, agencies, or anyone else with more power and better paperwork. It helped pay for copies, letters, legal consultations, and emergency preservation requests. Marcus did not want fame. He wanted fewer people standing alone under fluorescent lights while someone else wrote the first lie. He began speaking at community centers. At first, he hated it. Marcus had never enjoyed being watched. But he understood that his story could teach what his silence could not. He told people to keep receipts, to write times down, to ask for cameras early, to save messages, to notice who controls the record. He told them that documentation was not distrust. Sometimes it was protection. Sometimes it was dignity given a place to stand. Nia came with him when she could. She sat in the back with a notebook of her own, writing things down in a hand that looked more and more like his. Years later, Marcus would remember that more clearly than any news clip. Not the headlines, not the settlement, not Victor's downfall or Calder's dismissal. He would remember his granddaughter learning that truth was not just something a person felt. It was something a person protected. One evening, after a community meeting, Naya asked him whether he ever wished he had shouted that day in the store. Marcus thought about it longer than she expected. Then he told her that part of him did. Part of him wished he had made every shopper stop, every employee listen, every liar feel the force of his pain. But another part of him knew that anger alone would have been used against him. The world often demands perfect calm from the wounded and perfect trust in the powerful. That is not fair. But Marcus had learned how to survive inside that unfairness long enough for the record to speak. Nia did not like that answer. Marcus did not either. But truth is not always satisfying in the places where pain first asks for satisfaction. Sometimes the deeper victory comes later, when the lie has exhausted itself and the quiet details remain standing. Months passed. The grocery store changed in small ways. Employees received training that no one could dismiss as optional. Customer accusations required documented verification before public confrontation. Footage preservation became automatic when disputes were raised. Workers had a protected way to report pressure from management. None of it made the store perfect. No policy can. But policies are doors. And before Marcus, people like him had often been left outside them. Lena kept her job and eventually became a shift lead. She carried the memory of her fear with humility, not as punishment, but as instruction. When new employees joined, she told them that silence could feel safe in the moment and still become a wound later. She never used Marcus's story carelessly, but the lesson shaped the way she treated people. Victor did not return. For a while, he tried to describe himself as a victim of public outrage, but the inventory findings followed him. People who build lies often expect sympathy when the lie collapses on them. Marcus did not celebrate Victor's ruin, but he did not confuse mercy with denial. Victor had chosen a scapegoat. He had chosen Marcus because he thought a tired black man in a faded hoodie would be easy to doubt. The consequence belonged to him. Calder disappeared from private security work. That, too, was justice of a kind. The authority he had used to silence a man was taken from him because he had proven he could not be trusted with it. Marcus did not need to see him suffer. He only needed to know that the next tired customer would not have to face that same cold certainty from the same man. As for Marcus, he kept working, not because he had to accept invisibility again, but because honest work had never been the shame. The shame had always belonged to those who looked at the work and decided the worker mattered less. He still rose before sunrise. He still walked through blue darkness. He still carried the black notebook. But now, when courthouse employees passed him, some greeted him by name. Some looked embarrassed. A few even thanked him. Marcus accepted the thanks without becoming dependent on it. He had learned not to build his dignity on other people finally noticing what should have been obvious. Recognition was welcome, but it was not the source. His worth had existed on the grocery store floor. It had existed when the cupcake was crushed. It had existed when the receipts were missing, when the crowd looked away, when Victor smiled, when Calder wrote, when no apology had yet arrived. That was the lesson he wanted Nia to keep. A person is not made innocent by footage. The footage only proves what was already true. A person is not made worthy by a public apology. The apology only admits what should never have been denied. And dignity does not begin when powerful people recognize it. Dignity is already there, even when the world refuses to bow its head before it. On Nia's next birthday, there were blue cupcakes on the kitchen table again. This time, the frosting was perfect. The little white sugar stars sat untouched. Ruth lit one candle because Nia said 12 had been too many last year, and 13 felt too dramatic. Marcus laughed at that, a quiet laugh that made Ruth smile. For a moment, there were no lawyers, no footage, no statements, no old courthouse documents, no grocery store floor. There was only family, warm light, and a child blowing out a candle in a room where love had survived the attempt to shame it. After Nia made her wish, she asked Marcus if he wanted to know what it was. He told her wishes should be kept private. She said this one could be shared because it was not only for her. She had wished that people would learn to check the truth before they decided who someone was. Marcus looked at Ruth then, and Ruth looked back at him with tears in her eyes, because that was the kind of wish no child should have to make, and every adult should have already honored. Years later, people would still ask Marcus about the freezer camera. They wanted to know how he noticed it. They wanted to know whether he felt lucky. Marcus always answered carefully. Luck had played a role, maybe. But what saved him wasn't luck alone. It was a lifetime of paying attention. It was a notebook in a pocket. It was a wife who refused silence. It was a granddaughter who believed him before the world did. It was a lawyer who moved before evidence could disappear. It was a cashier who found her courage. And it was one small red light blinking above a freezer case, while everyone else assumed the truth had no witness. The world is full of people like Marcus. People who clean buildings before sunrise. People who count coins at pharmacy counters. People who keep receipts because they know how quickly suspicion can find them. People who are treated as background until someone needs a scapegoat. People who have learned to stay calm, not because they feel no anger, but because they know their anger will be used as evidence against them. And the world is also full of people standing nearby with carts and baskets, deciding whether to look away. That is where justice often begins or dies. Not only in courts, not only in statements, not only in viral clips. It begins in the small human moment, when someone sees a person being judged too quickly and decides that comfort is not more important than truth. It begins when a cashier speaks, when a shopper records, when a worker preserves a file, when a family writes down the time, when someone refuses to let the first version of a story become the only version. Marcus Hale did not set out to become a symbol. He set out to buy groceries, medicine, and one blue cupcake for a child he loved. But the people who tried to humiliate him forgot something that powerful people often forget. Quiet people are not empty. Tired people are not careless. Poor people are not proof of guilt. And a man who has spent his life protecting records knows exactly where truth likes to hide. So if you remember anything from Marcus's story, remember this. Never decide what a person is before you know what happened to them. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Never assume dignity disappears just because a crowd refuses to see it. And when the lie is loud, rushed, and confident, look for the small thing still blinking in the corner. Because sometimes justice does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a receipt, a notebook, a witness who finally speaks, and a forgotten camera that refuses to look away. The slap changed everything.
You do not tell me no!
Daniela stood frozen, stunned and deeply hurt, unable to understand why she had been slapped for simply doing her job.
Did anyone see that?
Her badge became a weapon.
People in your position should know better.
She had only followed protocol.
This corridor is restricted. Please return to reception.
Helen knew the truth.
She She was helping me.
Vivian's lie found protection.
Get her out of my hospital. I never want to see her here again.
I'll handle it.
No one asked why.
You took my badge, but you never asked if I was hurt.
Silence followed her out.
I am sorry.
Then she called Samuel.
Samuel, they took my badge. They threw me out.
But it had begun earlier. Earlier that day, a chain reaction collision on the interstate had brought more than 20 injured people through the hospital doors in less than an hour. The trauma bays filled first, then the recovery rooms, then every space that could safely hold a patient with monitoring equipment. Nurses were called from outpatient services, surgical recovery, and specialty clinics. Doctors who had expected routine consultations found themselves treating internal bleeding, fractured ribs, head injuries, and terrified children separated from their parents. The hospital was not merely busy, it was stretched to its edge. In the middle of that crisis, Vivian Hollis arrived for a procedure that was never meant to be urgent. Vivian was 61 years old, immaculately dressed, sharply composed, and accustomed to entering rooms as though they had been built for her. Her family name appeared on plaques throughout the city. The Hollis Foundation had funded scholarship programs, museum exhibits, political campaigns, and hospital projects. 3 years earlier, the foundation had pledged several $million to St. Alden for a pediatric expansion that had not yet been completed. To most people in the hospital, Vivian was not just a donor. She was a force. The staff knew that her complaints reached the executive offices faster than emergency calls reached certain departments. They knew she had private contact numbers for members of the board. They knew that when Vivian Hollis was unhappy, someone usually found a way to make the problem disappear. That afternoon, the problem was supposed to be Daniela. Vivian had been scheduled for a minor cosmetic dermatology procedure in the outpatient wing. It was not dangerous. It was not time-sensitive. It could have been performed another day without any risk to her health. But the procedure required a small recovery area, nursing support, and a team that had suddenly been reassigned to patients coming out of emergency surgery. Daniela had been asked to help coordinate the delays. She approached Vivian with the same professionalism she gave every patient. She explained that the hospital was responding to a mass casualty event and that several staff members needed for Vivian's appointment had been pulled into critical care. She assured her that the procedure would be rescheduled quickly and that the medical team would contact her personally once the crisis had stabilized. It should have been a simple explanation. Instead, Vivian stared at Daniela as though she had been personally insulted. At first, Vivian spoke in the controlled, polished tone of someone who wanted to make sure everyone nearby understood that she believed herself to be above the inconvenience. She questioned why a hospital that had accepted millions from her family could not find one nurse and one room for a procedure that had been scheduled weeks earlier. Daniela explained again that patients with life-threatening injuries were being prioritized. That was when Vivian's expression changed. Her words became colder. Her patience became theatrical. She made comments about Daniela's manner, her accent, and the idea that someone in Daniela's position had the authority to tell her no. She did not need to shout at first. Her contempt was sharper when delivered quietly. Daniela had dealt with angry families before. She had been blamed for wait times she could not control, for outcomes she could not change, and for rules she did not create. She understood that fear often made people cruel, but Vivian was not afraid. Vivian was offended. There was a difference. Daniela stayed calm. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply repeated the truth that mattered most. The hospital had limited resources at that moment, and those resources had to go to the patients whose lives depended on them. Vivian seemed almost stunned that the answer did not change. To her, money had always changed answers. When she realized Daniela would not bend, Vivian removed her phone from her handbag and called Graham Mercer. Graham was the chief operating officer of St. Alden Regional. He had spent years building a reputation as a polished administrator who could calm donors, impress board members, and make difficult situations look manageable. He was known for speaking about integrity in public meetings and efficiency in private ones. But inside the hospital, people had learned that his definition of efficiency often depended on who was upset and how much influence that person had. He answered Vivian's call almost immediately. Daniela could hear only fragments of the conversation from where she stood, but she did not need to hear every word to understand what was happening. Vivian's tone was carefully wounded. She described herself as being mistreated. She framed Daniela's refusal to ignore triage rules as disrespect. She suggested that the hospital had forgotten who helped keep its doors open. Within minutes, Graham arrived in person. He did not ask what had happened in the emergency department. He did not ask how many trauma patients had arrived. He did not ask why Daniela had made the decision she did. He looked first at Vivian, then at Daniela, and it became clear that he had already chosen whose version of the story mattered. Graham took Daniela aside and told her that she would be moved temporarily to the 3rd floor. The explanation sounded harmless on the surface. He said the situation had become tense and that it would be better for everyone if Daniela worked somewhere else for the remainder of the shift. But Daniela understood exactly what it was. It was punishment disguised as conflict management. She had followed the hospital's policies. She had protected emergency patients. She had spoken respectfully. Yet Graham was moving her because Vivian Hollis had complained. Daniela considered protesting. She considered asking him to put the order in writing. But a call came through about an elderly patient upstairs who needed assistance, and the emergency department remained overwhelmed. In that moment, she made the choice she always made when things were difficult. She put the patients first. She accepted the transfer and went upstairs. For the next 40 minutes, Daniela worked in the 3rd floor observation unit, helping nurses manage overflow from the emergency department. The patients there were not all critically injured, but many needed monitoring after surgery, after falls, or after sudden medical episodes that could become serious without warning. One of them was Helen Ward. Mrs. Ward was 78 years old and had come to St. Alden after becoming dizzy at home. Her daughter was stuck in traffic after the interstate accident, and Helen had been alone for most of the afternoon. She was frightened, but trying not to show it. Daniela noticed the way the woman kept watching the hallway each time footsteps passed, hoping someone familiar would appear. Daniela took a few extra minutes to explain what the doctors were monitoring. She adjusted the blanket around Helen's shoulders, made sure her call button was within reach, and promised that someone would keep her informed. To Daniela, it was a small act of care. To Helen, was the only moment that day when she felt like more than a chart number. That kindness would matter later. At the time, Daniela had no way of knowing that Vivian Hollis was moving through the same floor, angry that she had not been given the private route and private attention she believed she deserved. Vivian had been offered a quiet waiting area near the outpatient department while her procedure was formally postponed. But waiting was not something she accepted easily. She had left that area on her own, determined to find someone who would make the hospital's inconvenience disappear. A volunteer had told her that a private exit on the 3rd floor could lead more directly to the parking structure. The volunteer did not know that the route required going through a staff-only corridor. Vivian either did not hear the warning or did not care. When she stepped into the restricted hallway, she saw Daniela near Helen Ward's room. To a reasonable person, it would have looked like coincidence. To Vivian, it became proof of a story she had already invented. She saw the nurse who had refused her. She saw the same steady expression that had made her feel powerless downstairs. And in that moment, Vivian decided that Daniela's presence could not possibly be part of her work. It had to be defiance. Daniela noticed Vivian before Vivian spoke. She recognized the sound of expensive heels against the polished hospital floor. She turned and saw the woman standing near the restricted access sign, her face tense with anger. Daniela did not accuse her. She did not make a scene. She simply reminded Vivian that she was in a staff-only area and offered to help her return to the public corridor. That should have ended it. But Vivian had already crossed the line where reason mattered. She began raising her voice. She accused Daniela of following her. She suggested that Daniela had been waiting for a chance to embarrass her again. Her words were loud enough to draw attention from nearby rooms and the nurses' station. Daniela tried to keep the situation contained. She told Vivian that she was assigned to the 3rd floor and had been there since being moved by administration. She said that the hallway was restricted for patient safety and that Vivian needed to leave the area. Vivian did not want an explanation. She wanted a target. She stepped closer. The air in the corridor seemed to change. People began to watch, but no one stepped forward. The orderly with the linens stopped near the wall. A respiratory therapist paused outside a room. Dr. Megan Blake emerged from the charting station with a look of concern, then hesitation. Vivian reached for Daniela's hospital badge. The motion was so sudden that Daniela barely had time to react. Vivian pulled the badge free from its clip, looked at Daniela's name, then held it as though it were proof that she had the right person. She accused Daniela of harassing a donor. She accused her of making threats. She accused her of disrespecting the hospital. None of it was true. Daniela did not shout back. She did not try to grab the badge. She did not even defend herself in the way Vivian seemed to expect. The restraint on Daniela's face only seemed to make Vivian angrier, because there was nothing she could use as evidence of aggression. So she created it. The slap came fast. It was hard enough to turn Daniela's head to the side. Helen Ward saw it from the doorway of her room. Dr. Megan Blake saw it from only a few feet away. The orderly saw it. The respiratory therapist saw it. The nurses near the station saw it. Several people saw the exact moment Vivian became the aggressor. And yet, in the first seconds afterward, no one said a word. Daniela slowly turned back toward Vivian. One hand rose to her cheek, not dramatically, not with anger, but almost as though she needed to confirm what had just happened. Vivian stood there breathing heavily, looking less ashamed than triumphant. She knew what her money had bought her in the past. She knew that people often chose safety over truth. Then Graham Mercer arrived. No one knew who had called him. Perhaps Vivian had done it herself. Perhaps someone at the front desk had already alerted his office. Either way, he appeared with the speed of a man who understood that a powerful donor in distress could become a public relations disaster. He walked into the corridor, took one look at Vivian, and went directly to her. He asked if she was all right. He asked if she needed medical attention. He asked if anyone had made her feel unsafe. He did not ask Daniela why her cheek was red. He did not ask why Vivian was standing in a restricted hallway. He did not ask the people who had witnessed the incident what they had seen. Vivian told Graham that Daniela had confronted her again. She claimed that the nurse had followed her upstairs and behaved aggressively. She implied that she had only reacted because she felt threatened. Graham listened as though every word were already proven. Then he turned to Daniela. His expression was not angry. That would have been easier to understand. It was colder than anger. It was the expression of someone who had decided that one employee's dignity was an acceptable price for protecting a donor relationship. He asked Daniela to hand over her badge. For the first time that day, something inside her seemed to shift. Not because she was guilty, not because she believed anyone had the right to treat her this way, but because she realized the hospital was not even pretending to care about the truth. She handed him the badge. Graham informed her that she was being placed on administrative leave pending review. He did not say that Vivian had struck her. He did not mention witnesses. He did not say an investigation would begin immediately. He used careful language about avoiding further disruption and preserving the hospital's reputation. Reputation. That was what mattered. Not the nurse who had been assaulted. Not the patients who had watched adults fail them. Not the message sent to every staff member in the hallway who now understood that doing the right thing could cost them their job if the wrong person became offended. Graham instructed Daniela to leave through the employee exit near the parking garage. He said it would be better than walking through the main lobby while the situation was still sensitive. Daniela understood the real reason. He wanted her gone quietly. He wanted Vivian protected from questions. And he wanted the hospital to appear calm, even if calm had to be built on a lie. As Daniela walked toward the back exit, she passed the same people who had watched Vivian strike her. Some looked ashamed. Some looked frightened. Some could not meet her eyes at all. Dr. Megan Blake stood near the nurse's station, holding the patient file so tightly that the edges bent beneath her fingers. She looked like she wanted to say something. Daniela could see it in her face, but Megan remained silent. Lillian Park, the charge nurse on duty, was not in the hallway when the slap happened. She arrived minutes later and saw only the aftermath. Daniela without her badge, Vivian surrounded by administrators, and Graham speaking in the low, controlled tone he used when he wanted people to stop asking questions. Lillian had worked at St. Alden for more than 20 years. She had watched Graham reward obedience and punish resistance. She had seen nurses move to undesirable shifts after speaking too openly in meetings. She had seen staff members blamed for problems created by budget cuts. She had learned to protect herself by staying careful. But when she saw Daniela walking toward the employee exit with one hand pressed lightly against her cheek, something in Lillian's carefully built silence began to crack. Daniela did not cry in the hallway. She waited until she reached the parking garage. Outside, the late afternoon sun had started to fade behind the city buildings. Ambulances still arrived at the emergency entrance on the other side of the hospital. From where Daniela stood, she could hear distant sirens and the faint hum of traffic. Life was continuing as though nothing had happened. Her phone felt heavy in her hand. For several minutes, she did not call anyone. She sat in her car without starting it, staring at the badge clip still attached to her uniform, even though the badge itself had been taken away. That small, empty piece of plastic seemed to say everything. 8 years of loyalty reduced to an absence. Eventually, she called Samuel Reed. Samuel was not a politician. He was not a lawyer. He was not someone who enjoyed using his title to intimidate people. He was a physician, the director of emergency services for Horizon Medical Alliance, one of the largest regional health systems in the state. He had spent most of his career working in emergency medicine, where decisions had to be made quickly, and where the difference between arrogance and competence could mean the difference between life and death. He understood pressure. He understood grief. He understood that hospitals could be flawed places run by people who were too tired, too ambitious, or too afraid. But when Daniela told him what had happened, he did not interrupt her with promises of revenge. He listened. She told him about Vivian's appointment. She told him about the interstate accident. She told him how Graham had moved her because Vivian was angry. She told him about the restricted hallway, the stolen badge, the slap, the silence, and the order to leave through the back. By the time she finished, Samuel was quiet for a long moment. He knew Daniela well enough to understand that she would not exaggerate. She was not someone who turned every insult into a crisis. She had spent years standing up for patients without making herself the center of the story. So when she said she had been treated like a criminal for following triage rules, he believed her. But Samuel also knew something Daniela was too hurt to think about at that moment. The next morning, he was scheduled to visit St. Alden Regional as part of Horizon's preliminary evaluation of a possible merger. Horizon had been considering whether to bring St. Alden into its network, a move that could mean new equipment, expanded trauma services, financial stability, and access to a larger regional system. St. Alden wanted that merger badly. Graham Mercer wanted it badly too. Samuel did not tell Daniela that he would use the visit to punish anyone. He did not promise that Vivian would regret what she had done. He did not suggest that his title could erase the humiliation Daniela had suffered. Instead, he reminded her of something she had told countless patients and families over the years. When the truth matters, details matter. He encouraged her to write down everything while it was fresh. The timeline, the names of witnesses, the location, the words Graham used, the fact that Vivian had entered a restricted corridor, the fact that Daniela had been transferred to that floor by Graham himself, the fact that no one had asked her for a statement before taking her badge. Daniela spent most of the night doing exactly that. She wrote slowly at first, then more steadily. The more she recorded, the clearer the pattern became. This was not only about one woman losing her temper. It was about a hospital administrator who had chosen a donor over a nurse before the assault had even happened. By midnight, Daniela had completed a formal complaint. She included no dramatic language, no insults, no threats, only facts. The next morning, Graham Mercer arrived at St. Alden, expecting to host an important meeting with Horizon Medical Alliance. He expected polished presentations, financial projections, and conversations about expansion. He expected to emphasize the hospital's strong community reputation and the promise of the pediatric wing the Hollis Foundation might help complete. Instead, he found Samuel Reed standing in the executive conference room. For a brief moment, Graham did not recognize him. Then he saw the name card on the table, and his face changed. Samuel was not there as Daniela's fiancé, at least not officially. He was there as Horizon's Director of Emergency Services and a senior member of the clinical evaluation team. Graham greeted him with the smooth confidence of an administrator who believed he still controlled the room. But Samuel's manner was different from what Graham expected. He was polite, professional, and calm. He asked about trauma capacity, staffing ratios, patient safety reporting, and the hospital's policies for protecting employees from workplace violence. At first, Graham answered as though the questions were routine. Then Samuel asked how St. Alden handled incidents in which staff members reported being assaulted by patients, visitors, or donors. The room became still. Graham gave the standard answer. He spoke about zero tolerance. He mentioned reporting procedures, security protocols, and employee support services. Samuel listened without reacting. Then he asked whether those procedures had been followed the previous afternoon. Graham's confidence began to fade. He did not yet know the full extent of Daniela's complaint. He did not know how much Samuel knew. He did not know whether the matter had already reached Horizon's legal and ethics teams. But he understood one thing. The nurse he had sent out through the back exit was not going to disappear quietly. And somewhere inside the hospital, in a corridor filled with cameras no one had bothered to review, the truth was waiting. The truth did not arrive at St. Alden Regional Hospital all at once. It came in pieces. First, it came through Daniela's written complaint, which was so precise that even Graham Mercer could not dismiss it as an emotional reaction. Daniela had documented the time Vivian Hollis arrived, the reason her procedure had been postponed, the fact that emergency resources had been diverted to victims of the interstate collision, and the order Graham gave to move her to the 3rd floor. She listed the names of everyone she remembered seeing in the hallway after the assault. She described how Vivian had entered a restricted corridor, taken her badge, accused her of following her, and struck her in front of witnesses. Most importantly, Daniela included the part Graham had hoped she would leave out. She described how he had treated Vivian as the victim before anyone had even asked what happened. She described how he had taken her badge without hearing her account. She described how he had told her to leave through the employee exit, not because there was a safety concern, but because he wanted the incident to disappear before anyone in the main lobby had a chance to notice. Daniela did not use dramatic words. She did not call Graham corrupt. She did not call Vivian dangerous. She did not try to make herself sound heroic. She simply told the truth in the clearest way she knew how. And that was exactly what made the complaint difficult to bury. By mid-morning, the document had reached the hospital's Human Resources Department, the Internal Compliance Office, and the legal team responsible for reviewing workplace violence incidents. Normally, Graham would have found a way to slow the process down. He knew how institutions worked. He knew that paperwork could vanish into review cycles, that meetings could be postponed, and that people often became tired before the truth became inconvenient for the right people. But this time, the complaint had arrived on the same morning that Horizon Medical Alliance was evaluating St. Alden for a potential merger. That timing changed everything. Samuel Reed had already disclosed his personal relationship with Daniela to Horizon's ethics office before stepping into the conference room. He made it clear that he would not be involved in deciding whether Daniela's complaint was valid, whether discipline was appropriate, or whether the hospital should face legal consequences. He understood that Daniela deserved a fair investigation, not a favor disguised as justice. But he also made something else clear. Any hospital seeking to join Horizon's network would be evaluated not only on finances, equipment, and patient volume, but also on culture. A hospital could have polished floors, impressive fundraising brochures, and a long list of wealthy supporters, but none of that mattered if employees were afraid to report violence. None of it mattered if administrators allowed money to determine who received care and who received protection. To Samuel, the question was no longer whether St. Alden had a public relations problem. The question was whether St. Alden had a moral problem. Graham tried to answer with the language he knew best. He spoke about confusion. He mentioned that Vivian Hollis had felt threatened. He suggested that the situation had unfolded quickly and that everyone was still gathering facts. But the more carefully he spoke, the more obvious it became that he had never intended to gather facts at all. He had gathered influence. He had gathered fear. He had gathered the silence of people who believed that protecting themselves was safer than protecting the truth. Samuel did not argue with him. He did not need to. He simply asked that the meeting be paused while Horizon's clinical review team received an updated report on the hospital's employee safety policies, donor access procedures, and incident response records from the previous 12 months. That request sounded routine. For Graham, it was devastating, because St. Alden did have records, and records had a way of remembering what frightened people tried to forget. While the executive offices struggled to contain the growing problem, Lillian Park sat alone in a small staff lounge on the 3rd floor, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. She had worked at St. Alden long enough to know how these situations usually ended. The person with the least power became the easiest person to blame. The employee who followed policy was called difficult. The patient, donor, or executive who caused the harm was treated carefully, gently, almost respectfully, as though their status had transformed bad behavior into a misunderstanding. Lillian had seen it happen before. Years earlier, a surgical technician had reported that a visiting physician was verbally abusive towards staff. The technician had been told that he was too sensitive. Another time, a nurse complained that a board member's family member had entered a restricted unit after visiting hours. The nurse was quietly moved to a less desirable schedule 2 weeks later. No one said the transfer was punishment, but everyone understood why it happened. Lillian had never forgotten those moments. She had also never forgiven herself for surviving them by staying quiet. When she saw Daniela leaving through the employee exit the afternoon before, something inside her had broken open. Daniela had not been reckless. She had not been rude. She had not gone looking for conflict. She had simply done what nurses were trained to do: protect the people whose needs were most urgent. And for that, she had been humiliated. Lillian opened her work laptop and began searching through staffing records. At first, she only intended to confirm Daniela's transfer to the 3rd floor. But as she reviewed the scheduling logs, she found something else. The transfer order had not been entered through the normal staffing system. Graham had called it in directly to the shift supervisor, bypassing the usual documentation process. There was no written concern about Daniela's performance, no formal complaint from Vivian, no safety note, no record that Daniela had done anything wrong. There was only the abrupt transfer. Then Lillian found an email from 3 months earlier. It had been sent by Graham to a small group of department managers. The message was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. It instructed staff to make reasonable accommodations for Vivian Hollis and her family whenever possible, especially when they visited the hospital for non-emergency care. The email did not openly say that Vivian should be allowed to skip triage rules. It was more careful than that, but the wording left little room for interpretation. Graham had encouraged staff to treat the Hollis family as exceptional. In a hospital, exceptional treatment could become dangerous very quickly. Lillian read the message 3 times. Then she forwarded it to the compliance office. She added a statement of her own. For the first time in years, she did not soften the truth. She explained that Graham's approach had created a culture in which employees believed powerful donors could complain their way around medical policy. She described how staff members had learned to avoid conflict with Vivian even when her requests were unreasonable. She admitted that she had not spoken up sooner because she feared retaliation. Her hands shook as she pressed send, but after the message disappeared from her screen, Lillian felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt lighter. Not because the fear was gone, because she had finally stopped allowing fear to decide who she was. Across the hospital, Dr. Megan Blake was facing a different kind of battle. Megan had become a doctor because she believed medicine was an act of courage. She had imagined courage as the ability to work through exhaustion, make difficult diagnoses, deliver bad news, and stand steady when families were falling apart. She had not imagined that courage could also mean speaking when everyone around her was silent. The moment Vivian slapped Daniela had replayed in Megan's mind all night. Each time she remembered it, she saw something new. She saw the way Daniela had not moved toward Vivian. She saw the way Vivian grabbed the badge first. She saw the way Graham arrived and immediately turned his attention toward the woman with money instead of the nurse with a red mark across her face. Megan knew exactly what had happened, and she had said nothing. At first, she told herself that it was not her place. Then she told herself that security cameras would reveal the truth anyway. Then she told herself that she had patients to care for and could not risk creating more chaos. But beneath every excuse was the same ugly fact. She had been afraid. Megan had heard stories about Graham. Everyone had. She knew he had influence over staffing, promotions, and performance reviews. She knew he could make a person's work life miserable without ever saying anything that could be proven. But by the next morning, another thought had become impossible to ignore. Daniela had been afraid too, and Daniela had still done the right thing. Megan went to the compliance office and asked to provide a statement. At first, the investigator looked surprised. The official report from the previous day contained no mention of an assault. It only referred to a disagreement involving a donor and a staff member. But Megan spoke carefully and directly. She said she had witnessed Vivian strike Daniela. She said Daniela had not threatened Vivian or moved toward her. She said she saw Vivian pull Daniela's badge before the slap. Then Megan said the words that mattered most. She said that Graham had never asked her what she saw. The investigator wrote everything down. By early afternoon, the hallway that had been silent the day before was beginning to speak. Not loudly, not perfectly, but enough. The next witness came from a place no one expected. Mrs. Helen Ward had spent most of the day waiting for her daughter, who finally arrived after traffic from the interstate accident had eased. Helen had been tired, frightened, and overwhelmed by the hospital environment. But when she heard from a nurse that Daniela had been sent home after an incident, she immediately asked to speak with someone in charge. Helen did not know anything about Vivian Hollis. She did not know about the Hollis Foundation, the merger, or the executives meeting upstairs. She did not know Samuel Reed's title. She only knew what she had seen from her room. She told the investigator that Daniela had been kind to her when she felt alone. She described how the nurse had explained her condition, adjusted her blanket, and made sure she understood what was happening. Then she described the woman who entered the hallway angry and loud. Helen said Vivian had accused Daniela before Daniela had even spoken. She said she remembered hearing Vivian claim that Daniela had followed her. But Helen knew that was impossible, because Daniela had been on the floor long before Vivian arrived. She had seen Daniela checking on patients, speaking with nurses, and helping near the observation rooms. Helen's statement did more than confirm the assault. It destroyed the story Vivian had tried to create, because it established that Daniela had not been following anyone. She had been working. Meanwhile, the security department was reviewing the cameras. Graham had assumed the hallway footage would be unclear. He remembered that the third-floor corridor had been under renovation months earlier, and he believed the camera near the restricted access sign had been removed or turned at an angle that would not capture the confrontation. What he did not know was that the hospital had upgraded several cameras after a previous incident involving an unauthorized visitor. The system had been designed to store footage automatically on an external server, not on equipment controlled by the local administration. That meant no one inside St. Alden could quietly erase it. The security supervisor, a man named Robert Kell, had worked at the hospital for 14 years. He was not easily impressed by wealthy visitors or executive pressure. His job had taught him that truth often looked different from the first story people told. When he reviewed the footage, he found exactly what everyone feared and hoped to see. Vivian entered the restricted corridor alone. Daniela was already there, assisting with patient care. Vivian approached Daniela first. Daniela did not chase her, threaten her, or block her way. She simply spoke to her from a respectful distance and gestured toward the public hallway. Then Vivian took Daniela's badge. Then Vivian slapped her. The camera did not capture every word clearly, but it captured enough. It captured the truth. Robert also pulled the access control logs. Vivian had not been authorized to enter the third-floor staff corridor. Daniela's badge had been scanned on that floor because Graham had ordered her transfer there. The timeline matched Daniela's complaint perfectly. The evidence was not emotional. It was not opinion. It was not influenced by money, fear, or reputation. It was time-stamped. And because it was time-stamped, it was almost impossible to deny. When the footage reached the compliance office, the tone of the investigation changed immediately. What had begun as a workplace complaint became a formal review of assault, retaliation, donor influence, and administrative misconduct. Vivian Hollis was contacted by the hospital's legal department and informed that the incident was under active investigation. At first, she reacted with disbelief. She insisted that Daniela had provoked her. She said she had felt threatened. She implied that the hospital was turning against her because a powerful outsider had become involved. But then she learned about the camera footage. For the first time, Vivian's certainty wavered. She had spent years believing that money protected her from consequences, not because she thought of herself as a villain, but because she had grown used to a world that rearranged itself around her. Restaurants found tables, offices returned calls. People apologized even when she was the one who had behaved badly. She had mistaken accommodation for respect. She had mistaken fear for loyalty. And now, for the first time in a very long time, she was discovering that neither could change a recording. Graham Mercer reacted differently. Vivian was angry. Graham was terrified. He knew the video alone could end his career. But the deeper investigation threatened to expose more than one bad decision. As compliance officers reviewed emails, staffing records, donor access notes, and executive communications, they began to see a pattern. Graham had not merely tried to protect Vivian after the assault. He had been protecting her for years. The record showed that Vivian and her family had received access to appointment slots outside normal scheduling procedures. On several occasions, staff had been pressured to move other patients, sometimes without clear medical reasons. There were emails where Graham described the Hollis family as essential to the hospital's future and encouraged managers to avoid upsetting them under any circumstances. He had never written the words that made the arrangement illegal. He was too careful for that. But the intent was everywhere, in the unusually fast responses to Vivian's complaints, in the special treatment notes hidden inside administrative emails, in the way staff members were warned to be flexible whenever the Hollis name appeared, in the way Daniela had been moved without documentation, and in the way Graham had tried to send her out through the back door before anyone could ask questions. The investigation revealed something else that made the board even more alarmed. The Hollis Foundation had not actually completed the donation it had promised for the pediatric expansion. The public announcement had created the impression that the money was secure, but much of the pledge was still tied to conditions deadlines, and naming rights negotiations. Graham had been behaving as though St. Alden already owed Vivian everything. In reality, the hospital had been bending itself around money it had not even received. That fact changed the atmosphere inside the boardroom. For months, the trustees had feared that challenging Vivian would jeopardize the hospital's future. But now they had to consider a harder question. What kind of future did they have if they allowed people with money to control medical decisions? By the end of the second day, the board called an emergency meeting. It was not public, not at first. The hospital's lawyers advised caution. There were employment laws, privacy concerns, possible criminal charges, and contractual obligations to review. But everyone in the room understood that the situation had moved beyond internal discipline. Daniela was invited to attend with a representative from the Nursing Association. She did not want Samuel beside her at the table, not because she did not appreciate him, but because she wanted the board to see her clearly, not as someone's fiancé, not as the person connected to Horizon Medical Alliance, not as a symbol of embarrassment for the hospital. She wanted them to see her as what she had always been, a nurse who had done her job. The meeting took place in a conference room on the top floor, a space with glass walls overlooking the city. It was the kind of room where people discussed budgets, expansion plans, and public image. On the walls hung framed photographs of groundbreaking ceremonies and smiling donors holding oversized checks. Daniela noticed those photographs when she entered. For a moment, she wondered how many people in those pictures had ever considered what happened to the staff members who made their institutions function every day. The nurses who stayed late, the technicians who kept equipment running, the housekeeping staff who cleaned rooms after tragedy, the receptionists who absorbed anger from frightened families, the people whose names never appeared on plaques. Vivian sat near the opposite end of the table with her attorney. She looked composed, but her confidence was different now. The sharp certainty from the hallway was gone. She had read the investigation summary. She knew the footage existed. She knew the witnesses had spoken. She knew that the hospital no longer needed to choose between protecting its employees and protecting a donor, because the donor had become the very thing the hospital needed protection from. Graham sat several seats away. He looked smaller than Daniela remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The man who had once controlled the hallway with a few cold instructions now kept his hands folded in front of him, as though he could make himself less visible by becoming still. The board chair began by summarizing the findings. She spoke in careful, formal language. She described the documented assault. She described the improper suspension of Daniela without investigation. She described the failure to follow workplace violence procedures. She described the evidence that donor influence had affected staffing and patient access decisions. Then she spoke about institutional responsibility. That was the moment the room changed. Because until then, the case could have been treated as a conflict between Vivian and Daniela. But the board chair made it clear that it was not. The failure belonged to the system. Vivian had committed the assault. Graham had enabled the cover-up. But the hospital had created the conditions in which both believed they could act without consequences. The chair then invited Daniela to speak. Daniela stood slowly. She had prepared notes, but when she looked around the room, she realized she did not want to read them. She did not want her words to sound rehearsed. She wanted the people who had spent 2 days discussing liability and reputation to understand what the event had felt like from the inside. She explained that she had worked at St. Alden for 8 years because she believed in the hospital's mission. She had cared for patients who could not pay, patients who had no family, patients who arrived angry because fear had made them feel helpless. She had never expected every day to be easy. She understood that hospitals were stressful places, but she said there was a difference between stress and injustice. She said the slap hurt, but it was not the part she would remember most. What she would remember was looking around afterward and seeing people who knew the truth choose silence because they believed the truth would not protect them. She said that no employee should have to wonder whether their safety depends on the social status of the person hurting them. She said that no patient should have to wait longer because someone wealthy believes their comfort matters more than another person's survival. And she said that no hospital should call itself a place of healing while allowing fear to become part of its culture. Daniela did not ask for revenge. She asked for change. She asked for a policy that protected employees from violence, regardless of who caused it. She asked for a clear process that prevented donors, executives, or board members from interfering with clinical triage. She asked for a confidential reporting system so witnesses could speak without fearing retaliation. And she asked for training that would teach staff what to do when they saw harm happening in front of them. When she finished, no one applauded. It was not that kind of room. But the silence this time was different. It was not fear. It was shame. Vivian's attorney spoke next. He attempted to frame the assault as an isolated lapse in judgment. He emphasized Vivian's years of charitable work, her contributions to the city, and the stress of the moment. He suggested that she had become overwhelmed after being told her procedure was delayed. But the argument sounded weak against the evidence. Stress did not explain entering a restricted corridor. Stress did not explain taking Daniela's badge. Stress did not explain inventing a false story. And stress certainly did not explain why Vivian expected the hospital to punish the woman she had struck. When Vivian finally spoke, she did not offer a full apology. Not yet. She said she regretted that the situation had escalated. She said she never intended for Daniela to be harmed. She said she had felt ignored and disrespected. But even in that moment, she still spoke as though the greatest injury had happened to her. Daniela watched quietly. She understood something Vivian did not. An apology that begins with self-pity is not an apology. It is another attempt to avoid accountability. The board adjourned for private deliberation. The decision took several hours. During that time, Samuel remained outside the process. Horizon's legal team had advised him not to participate in any decision involving Daniela directly, and he respected that boundary. But he sat with her in a quiet waiting area near the executive offices, not speaking much, not trying to solve anything, simply making sure she did not have to face the day alone. At one point, Daniela asked him whether he thought the board would actually do the right thing. Samuel did not answer with certainty. He had worked in healthcare long enough to know that institutions often changed slowly, even when the truth was obvious. He knew that board members worried about lawsuits, public image, donor relationships, and financial stability. He knew that people sometimes chose the least painful option instead of the right one. But he told her something else. Whatever the board decided, the truth had already changed the hospital. The hallway was no longer silent. The witnesses had spoken. The footage existed. The emails existed. And once people had seen how fear had shaped their choices, they could not pretend they had not seen it. Late that afternoon, the board called everyone back into the conference room. The chair read the decisions one by one. Vivian Hollis was immediately banned from all non-emergency access to St. Alden Regional Hospital. She would no longer be permitted to visit the hospital as a donor, guest, or member of any advisory group. Her foundation's naming rights agreement for the pediatric expansion was terminated. The board also voted to return all unused funds tied to the naming arrangement rather than allow the hospital's future to remain connected to her influence. For Vivian, it was a blow unlike anything she had experienced. Her name had always opened doors. Now it was being removed from one. The board also confirmed that the hospital would cooperate fully with law enforcement regarding the assault. The security footage and witness statements were turned over to the district attorney's office. Vivian's wealth could hire attorneys. It could delay some things. It could soften some public embarrassment. But it could not make the video disappear. Graham Mercer was suspended immediately pending termination proceedings. The board cited his failure to protect an employee, his improper handling of the incident, his retaliation against Daniela, and his repeated use of donor influence to interfere with hospital operations. A separate audit would review every case in which special treatment had been given to high-profile donors or board-connected individuals. For Graham, the punishment was more painful than losing a title. He had built his career around being indispensable. He had convinced himself that he was protecting the hospital by keeping powerful people happy. He had told himself that compromises were necessary, that everyone benefited from the money, that someone had to manage difficult personalities. But now the truth was impossible to avoid. He had not protected the hospital. He had weakened it. He had taught staff that policy could be bought. He had taught donors that influence came before ethics. And he had helped create the exact environment that allowed Vivian Hollis to believe she could strike a nurse and walk away untouched. Daniela was formally reinstated with full back pay for the time she had been placed on leave. The board issued a written apology, acknowledging that the hospital had failed to protect her. It also committed to establishing a new Employee Safety and Witness Protection Council, led jointly by frontline staff and independent compliance officers. Daniela was asked to help design the program. At first, she hesitated. She did not want a title given to her as a gesture. She did not want to become a symbol used in a press release and forgotten once the headlines faded. She wanted assurance that the council would have real authority, real reporting channels, and real protection for employees who spoke up. The board agreed. Lillian Park would serve beside her. Dr. Megan Blake volunteered to help create mandatory training for physicians and staff on bystander intervention, workplace violence, and ethical escalation. The program would teach people how to document incidents, how to intervene safely, and how to report retaliation without losing their jobs. For Megan, it was not enough to say she was sorry. She wanted to make sure the next person in her position would know what courage looked like before it was too late. Helen Ward received a letter from the board thanking her for her statement. She laughed when her daughter read it aloud, saying that she had only said what anyone should say when they see someone being treated badly. But that was exactly why her statement mattered. Helen had no title, no influence, no professional obligation. She had simply chosen not to look away. The criminal case against Vivian moved more slowly than the hospital investigation. Legal processes often did. Months passed. News outlets reported on the suspension of Graham Mercer and the termination of the Hollis naming agreement. Public reaction was divided at first. Some people praised the hospital for acting. Others argued that Vivian's years of charity should not be erased by one terrible moment. But the security footage changed the conversation. Once people saw what had happened, it became difficult to describe it as a misunderstanding. Vivian eventually accepted a plea agreement on a misdemeanor assault charge. She was ordered to complete community service at a nonprofit medical clinic, attend a behavioral accountability program, and remain away from Daniela. The court also required her to make a financial contribution to an independent employee safety fund, though Daniela made it clear that she did not want the money treated as forgiveness. No amount could undo what happened, but it could help protect someone else. Vivian's community service was not glamorous. The nonprofit clinic served people who had no insurance, people who worked multiple jobs, people who delayed care because they could not afford it, and people who had spent years being treated as invisible by systems that were supposed to help them. For the first time in her life, Vivian had to stand in a place where no one cared about her family name. She was not introduced as a donor. She was not given special access. She was asked to organize supplies, prepare waiting areas, help with basic administrative tasks, and listen when patients needed directions. At first, she resented it. She moved through the clinic with the stiff posture of someone who believed she had been unfairly reduced. But week after week, she saw people waiting patiently for care they could not afford. She saw exhausted mothers trying to keep children calm. She saw elderly patients apologizing for asking too many questions. She saw nurses working through lunch because there were too many people to help. And slowly, painfully, she began to understand something she had never understood before. Being treated with dignity was not a privilege. It was the minimum every person deserved. Whether Vivian truly changed was something no one could know immediately. Real change was not proven by one apology, one court order, or one act of public humility. It was proven over time, through choices made when no cameras were watching and no consequences were guaranteed. But one thing was certain: she would never again walk into St. Aldan Regional believing the building belonged to her. As for Graham Mercer, the investigation continued long after he left the hospital. The audit uncovered several other cases in which employees had been pressured to accommodate donors in ways that compromised policy. Some incidents were small, others were more serious. In every case, the pattern was the same. Graham had treated the hospital's ethical boundaries as flexible whenever money was involved. He lost his position, his influence, and the trust he had spent years pretending to earn. No one sent him out through a back exit. No one needed to. His choices had already made every door close. Months later, St. Aldan Regional Hospital began to change in visible ways. New signs appeared near staff entrances and waiting areas, clearly stating that violence against healthcare workers would not be tolerated, regardless of a visitor's status, connections, or financial contributions. A confidential reporting line was created. Security procedures were strengthened. Donor relations were separated from clinical decision-making. No executive could move a staff member or interfere with triage without written documentation and independent review. The changes did not erase the past, but they made it harder for the past to repeat itself. Daniela returned to work gradually. Her first day back on the 3rd floor was harder than she expected. She had told herself that she was ready. But when she stepped into the same corridor where Vivian had slapped her, her body remembered before her mind did. The polished floor, the restricted access sign, the sound of carts rolling in the distance, everything brought the moment back. For a few seconds, she stood still. Then Lillian appeared beside her. She did not say anything dramatic. She simply stood there, close enough to remind Daniela that she was no longer alone. Soon after, Megan joined them. She looked nervous but determined. She had spent the past few weeks helping develop the first staff workshop on intervention and reporting. She told Daniela that the session had filled faster than expected. Nurses, doctors, technicians, and support staff had all signed up. People wanted to learn. People wanted to do better. Daniela looked down the hallway. The The same place that had once witnessed silence was now becoming part of a different story. Not a perfect story. Not one where everyone suddenly became brave, but one where fear was no longer allowed to be the final answer. Over time, Daniela became known for more than what had happened to her. She became one of the strongest voices in the new Employee Safety Council. She listened to staff members who had been afraid to report harassment. She helped younger nurses understand that professionalism did not mean accepting abuse. She worked with administrators to make sure policies were not just words on paper. And every time someone told her they were afraid to speak up, she remembered the hallway. She remembered the badge being pulled from her uniform. She remembered the sting of Vivian's hand. But more than anything, she remembered the silence. Because silence had been the true enemy. Not only Vivian's arrogance, not only Graham's corruption, not even the hospital's fear of losing money. The real danger had been the moment when decent people saw wrong happening and convinced themselves that it was safer not to get involved. Daniela understood that courage did not always look dramatic. It did not always arrive with power, influence, or a perfect speech. Sometimes it looked like an older patient giving an honest statement. Sometimes it looked like a doctor admitting that she had been afraid. Sometimes it looked like a nurse forwarding an email she had kept hidden for months. And sometimes it looked like a person refusing to let humiliation turn them into silence. One afternoon, nearly a year after the incident, Daniela stood near the emergency department entrance as another busy shift began. The hospital was crowded again. Ambulances arrived. Families waited. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. The work had not become easier. Hospitals were still complicated places. People were still tired. Mistakes still happened. But something fundamental had changed. A young nurse approached Daniela after dealing with an angry visitor who had shouted at her near the waiting room. The nurse looked shaken. In the past, she might have apologized for causing trouble. She might have tried to handle it alone. Instead, she reported it. Security responded. A supervisor documented the incident. Other staff members stood beside her. It was a small moment. Most people would never hear about it. But Daniela watched the young nurse walk away, knowing she had been protected. And she felt something settle inside her. That was what justice looked like after the headlines faded. Not only punishment, not only public shame, but a world made safer because someone refused to accept what used to be normal. The day Vivian Hollis slapped Daniela Cruz, she believed she was punishing a nurse for forgetting her place. What she did not understand was that Daniela had never forgotten her place. Daniela's place was beside patients who needed care, beside co-workers who needed protection, beside the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. And in the end, the woman who thought the hospital belonged to her learned the lesson she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Money can buy attention. It can buy access. It can even buy silence for a while. But it cannot buy the right to take another person's dignity. And when enough people finally choose to speak, even the most powerful lie begins to fall apart. If you believe no one should have to stand alone against injustice, share your thoughts in the comments. And remember this: sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not look away.
That woman does not belong in this hearing.
Everyone watched the wrong woman. Leonard noticed the box.
How is that box here?
Naomi stayed perfectly still.
I did not come here for myself.
A red seal waited.
Please let the record speak.
And the moment Leonard saw that red seal, his practiced calm disappeared.
That seal was never supposed to surface.
Arthur sat trapped in silence.
I am still here.
His mind was still awake.
I understand what is happening.
Leonard controlled every word.
He cannot manage these decisions anymore.
He turned illness into weakness.
My uncle needs someone to protect him.
He called Naomi dangerous.
She is using his condition to get close to his money.
He still has the right to be heard.
She came to restore his voice.
The seal will be examined.
And its secret began 3 days earlier. The seal mattered because Arthur had tried to tell Naomi about it 3 days before the hearing, when everyone around him had already decided that his broken speech meant a broken mind. He was sitting in a rehabilitation room at St. Agnes Medical Center, his right hand resting weakly against a laminated communication board. The board contained simple pictures meant to help him choose water, food, pain medicine, rest, and family. Leonard had approved it because it made Arthur look helpless. It reduced a man who had built one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state to a row of small drawings that other people could interpret for him. But Arthur did not point to water. He did not point to home. He did not point to Leonard, even though Leonard had been standing nearby with the patient patience of a man performing concern for an audience. Arthur kept pressing one unremarkable image near the bottom of the board, a small brass lantern. The nurses assumed he wanted the bedside light adjusted. Leonard assumed he was confused. Naomi understood that Arthur was trying to reach a place that had been designed for exactly this moment. For nearly 40 years, Wren Meridian Industries had been known as Arthur Wren's Company. It had begun with a single machine shop on the eastern edge of the city and grown into a national manufacturer of building systems, public transit equipment, and low-cost modular housing. Arthur had become wealthy, but the company's most important story was never its market value. Its story was the people who had stayed when business was difficult. Welders, machinists, warehouse workers, clerks, maintenance crews, and families who could trace 3 generations of steady work back to the same factory gates. Arthur liked to say that a company was not a monument to the person who founded it. It was a promise made to the people whose hands kept it standing. He had put that belief into practice in ways that irritated investors and inspired employees. Wren Meridian maintained a housing division that built durable apartments for working families. It funded scholarships for trade students. It kept a medical assistance program for retired employees long after accountants argued that the expense no longer made business sense. Those choices were not sentimental accidents. Arthur had seen what happened when executives treated workers as numbers in a report. His own father had lost a job during a factory consolidation when Arthur was young, and the memory had stayed with him. Success, he believed, meant little if it required people who had given their lives to a business to become disposable the moment they became inconvenient. Leonard Hale had never shared that belief. He was Arthur's sister's son, and from the beginning, he had learned how to make ambition look like devotion. Leonard had joined the company 15 years earlier, after an impressive career in consulting. He understood market language, shareholder pressure, acquisition strategy, and the polished way successful people could turn a selfish proposal into a speech about the future. He could make a layoff sound like a rescue plan. He could make the sale of a neighborhood look like innovation. He could sit beside a worried employee, lower his voice, touch their shoulder, and leave them feeling that they had been heard, even while he prepared to do the opposite of what they needed. Arthur had noticed Leonard's talent long before he recognized the danger beneath it. He made his nephew chief operating officer because the company was changing and because he believed younger leadership needed room to grow. Leonard rewarded that trust by becoming indispensable. He learned every division, befriended board members, cultivated bankers, and placed loyal executives in positions where they could control the flow of information. By the time Arthur began asking difficult questions about certain transactions, Leonard had already built a circle around himself. The conflict between them had started quietly. Leonard wanted to sell Ren Meridian's housing division to a private investment group called Horizon Vale Partners. The sale would be described as a strategic restructuring. Investors would receive a large immediate return. Ren Meridian would become leaner, more profitable, and easier to reposition for a future public offering. Leonard spoke about the proposal as though it were the only rational answer to a changing economy. Arthur saw something else. He saw rents rising, workers being pushed farther from their jobs, and an entire mission being handed to people who had never cared about it. He knew Horizon Vale had a record of buying affordable properties, cutting maintenance, raising fees, and selling them again when the numbers improved. He also knew that once the division was gone, it would never return. For 2 years, Arthur refused to approve the sale. He delayed meetings, requested independent reviews, and kept his voting shares locked behind a trust structure that made a quick takeover difficult. Leonard smiled through every disagreement. In public, he praised his uncle's wisdom. In private, he began preparing for the day Arthur could no longer stand in his way. That day appeared to arrive on a cold Sunday morning in early March, when Arthur suffered a stroke. The stroke did not take his memory. It did not erase his judgment. It damaged the part of his brain that helped turn thoughts into spoken language. The doctors explained that he had aphasia, a condition that could make it painfully difficult to find words, form sentences, read quickly, or answer questions under pressure. To anyone willing to slow down, use written choices, allow time, and listen beyond speech, Arthur remained unmistakably himself. He recognized people. He understood documents. He reacted strongly to business news. He could point to figures, write fragments, and signal agreement or refusal with remarkable precision. But aphasia was a condition Leonard could exploit because it was easy to misunderstand. When Arthur struggled to answer a question in the hospital, Leonard would gently explain that his uncle had become confused. When Arthur tried to push away papers, Leonard would say he was agitated. When Arthur stared at a visitor with anger because he could not express what he wanted, Leonard would tell the visitor that the stroke had changed him. The people around Arthur were not cruel. Most were simply busy, worried, and unfamiliar with the difference between a person who cannot communicate in the usual way and a person who cannot think. Leonard made that confusion useful. Within days, he arranged for himself to control Arthur's schedule. Visitors had to be approved through Leonard's office. Phone calls were screened. Longtime employees who came to see Arthur were told that he needed quiet. Board members received carefully edited medical summaries. Even Arthur's home staff were warned that too much stimulation could endanger his recovery. Every restriction sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a wall. Naomi Reed saw the wall before anyone else did. She had not been a senior executive at Ren Meridian. She had never attended shareholder dinners or appeared in annual reports. For most of her career, Naomi had worked in the Records and Preservation Department, a small office in the oldest building on the company campus. Her work involved minutes from board meetings, trust amendments, land deeds, historical contracts, environmental reports, employee pension records, and the delicate task of deciding what should be protected when everyone else wanted more space. It was work that made powerful people impatient. They wanted files quickly. They wanted old disputes forgotten. They wanted signatures without context and summaries without inconvenient attachments. Naomi had learned that the most important document in a room was often the one someone called outdated. She had come to Ren Meridian in her 20s after her father injured his back at the factory and could no longer work steady shifts. Her father had been proud of the company even when it failed him. He kept a photograph of Arthur shaking hands with a line of welders after a contract victory. And he told Naomi that men like Arthur were rare because they still remembered the names of people who worked below them. Naomi did not romanticize the company. She knew its history included mistakes, layoffs, and decisions that hurt people. But she also knew Arthur and his late wife, Beatrice, had spent decades trying to build safeguards against the kind of greed that could erase a company's conscience in a single board meeting. Beatrice had been the first person at Ren Meridian to treat Naomi's work as something more than storage. She had a scholar's mind and a practical understanding of human weakness. She believed that people often behaved honorably when circumstances were easy, but true character appeared when money, illness, inheritance, and fear entered the same room. Years before Arthur's stroke, Beatrice had begun building a separate system for critical records. She called it the Lantern Archive because, in her words, hidden things should have a light kept for them. The archive was not a secret fortune or a private collection of gossip. It contained certified copies of documents that could matter if family pressure, corporate pressure, or medical crisis ever placed Arthur's intentions at risk. Arthur agreed because he understood what Beatrice was protecting. He had seen families tear themselves apart over a will. He had seen elderly founders surrounded by advisors who suddenly became experts on what was best for them. He had seen how quickly a person's own wishes could disappear once people decided that age, illness, or slow speech made those wishes inconvenient. The Lantern Archive was lodged not in Ren Meridian's offices, but in the county's restricted records repository. The company kept reference copies, but the certified originals were stored under a protocol requiring a court order, an independent records officer, and a documented chain of custody. Naomi had helped organize the material, but she could not open it alone. No one could. That was the point. Leonard knew the archive existed. Naomi was certain of it. He had attended the meeting years earlier, when the capacity safeguards were discussed. Although he had acted bored at the time, he had called them overly cautious and expensive. Beatrice had smiled politely, then asked that his objection be entered into the minutes. After Arthur's stroke, the first sign that Leonard was moving against Naomi came quietly. 2 folders vanished from the company records room. They were not dramatic files. One contained old board resolutions related to Arthur's voting shares. The other held correspondence about the Lantern Archive. Naomi noticed because she knew every box number and accession date. When she asked the new compliance manager about the missing folders, she was told that Leonard had ordered a document review. 3 days later, Naomi was informed that her position had been eliminated in a restructuring. The letter was efficient and cold. It praised her long service, offered a severance package, and required her to return all company property. It also contained a warning that unauthorized retention or disclosure of internal materials could lead to legal action. Naomi understood the message beneath the formal language. Leonard was not simply removing her from payroll. He was making sure that if she spoke up, people would assume she had stolen something. She went home that afternoon carrying an empty cardboard box. In the box were a framed photograph of her father, a small brass paperweight shaped like a lantern. and a note Beatrice had written years earlier after Naomi stayed late to recover a damaged pension ledger. The note thanked her for believing that records were a form of respect. For 2 weeks, Naomi did nothing, not because she did not care, but because she knew that rushing toward a man like Leonard would only give him the story he wanted. He needed her to appear emotional, resentful, and unstable. He needed the court to see a dismissed employee rather than a witness to something larger. Then Arthur's old driver called her from a number she did not recognize. The driver had worked for Arthur for 27 years. He sounded frightened. Leonard had reassigned him, but he had seen Arthur during a transfer between appointments. Arthur had struggled to hold a notepad. On it, he had drawn a rectangle, a red circle, and a small lantern. The driver did not understand, but he remembered Naomi had once spoken about old company records. He thought she might. Naomi understood immediately. The rectangle was a document box. The red circle was a seal. The lantern was the archive. She contacted Daniel Park, the attorney the probate court had appointed to represent Arthur's interests in the guardianship case. Daniel was not Leonard's lawyer and not Naomi's ally. He was a careful attorney with a reputation for taking difficult cases seriously. But when Naomi first called, he sounded tired. He had already reviewed the medical report from Dr. Martin Vale, a respected neurologist, who concluded that Arthur could not make complex decisions. He had also listened to Leonard's account of a confused old man being manipulated by a former employee. Daniel agreed to meet Naomi only because Arthur's driver had independently confirmed the strange drawing. Naomi did not try to impress him. She did not pretend to have answers she did not possess. She placed copies of her employment records, the severance letter, the archive protocol, and a timeline of missing files on the table between them. She explained what aphasia was. She explained why a hurried verbal examination could not determine whether Arthur understood financial decisions. And she explained that the Lantern Archive might contain documents relevant to any attempt to take control of Arthur's property. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked the question Leonard had wanted everyone to ask. Why should anyone believe a fired records employee over a nephew, a doctor, and a board of directors? Naomi answered that they should not believe her because she was fired. They should verify the record because the record either existed or it did not. That answer changed something. Daniel checked the county repository. The Lantern Archive was real. Its access conditions were real. And most importantly, a limited request for emergency guardianship had been filed by Leonard only 48 hours after the first scheduled board discussion of the Horizon Vale sale. The timing did not prove wrongdoing, but it made the request impossible to ignore. The guardianship petition was written to sound compassionate. It described Arthur as vulnerable, confused, and unable to understand the consequences of business decisions. It argued that without a responsible family member in charge, Arthur's health and assets could be endangered. Leonard offered himself as the obvious solution. He claimed he had no conflict of interest because he sought no personal gain and only wished to preserve the company his uncle loved. What the petition did not mention was the vote. Arthur's shares represented enough voting power to block the sale of the housing division. If a guardian controlled those shares, the board could approve the deal. If the deal went through, Horizon Vale would pay advisory fees to several outside firms. One of those firms, according to a thin thread Daniel found in public business filings, was connected to a company called Northwatch Strategies. Northwatch Strategies had been formed 6 months earlier by Leonard's former college roommate. It had no public website, no employees listed beyond a mailing address, and no history of major consulting work. Yet it had suddenly been named as a strategic transition advisor in preliminary documents related to the potential sale. Daniel did not accuse Leonard immediately. He knew better. A suspicious company was not proof. A coincidence was not proof. But the pattern was beginning to form. The day before the probate hearing, Daniel petitioned Judge Imani Cole for authority to inspect the Lantern archive under the court's supervision. Leonard objected through his counsel, arguing that old documents would only distract from Arthur's present medical condition. He also claimed that Naomi had manufactured the entire issue because she resented losing her job. Judge Cole did not approve a full release. She allowed a narrow preliminary inspection by the county records officer, Daniel, and counsel for both sides. Naomi could attend only as a factual witness because she had helped organize the archive. The limitation frustrated her, but it also protected the process. The evidence had to survive more than outrage. It had to survive scrutiny. At the county repository, the red-sealed box was brought from a climate-controlled shelf behind 2 locked doors. The records officer read the accession number aloud. Daniel verified it against the court order. Leonard's attorney watched every movement. Naomi stood with her hands folded, afraid to breathe too loudly. Inside the box were several folders, each stamped with dates and certification marks. The first contained Arthur's Capacity Safeguard Directive, executed 7 years earlier. It did not declare that Arthur would always be competent. It did something more careful. It required that if he ever suffered a condition affecting speech or conventional communication, any assessment of his decision-making ability had to include a qualified specialist familiar with supported communication methods. It also required that no family member with a financial interest in a pending corporate transaction could be appointed to control his voting shares without an independent review. Leonard's attorney dismissed the directive as old planning material. Daniel did not. The document was signed, witnessed, and properly certified. More damaging still, Leonard's name appeared on the final page. He had signed as an acknowledging witness. The second folder contained a limited trust amendment. Arthur had placed a portion of his controlling shares into a protective arrangement designed to prevent a guardian from using temporary medical vulnerability to force a corporate transaction. If Arthur could not communicate, the shares were not to be handed automatically to a relative. They were to be placed under a neutral fiduciary until Arthur's capacity had been properly assessed through the protocol he had chosen. The third folder was more troubling. It included minutes from a private meeting held after Leonard had once asked Arthur to sign broad proxy forms during a period of illness 3 years earlier. Arthur had refused. Beatrice had insisted that the conversation be documented. The minutes did not call Leonard a criminal. They did not predict the future. They simply recorded that Arthur was concerned about pressure from people who might benefit from his inability to participate fully in company decisions. That concern had been sealed with the rest of the archive, because Beatrice believed it could become a family weapon if it were made public too soon. At the end of the inspection, the records officer discovered a fourth folder that had been marked for release only if a petition for guardianship was filed by a person named in the earlier documents. The folder was still sealed in red wax. That was the box Naomi carried into court. Leonard had not expected it to appear. He had expected the archive to remain locked behind procedure long enough for him to gain emergency control. He had expected Arthur's silence to do the work for him. And when he saw the red seal in Naomi's arms, he understood that the courtroom was no longer a place where he could control every question. Judge Cole did not open the sealed folder that first morning. She ordered a short evidentiary hearing, required the parties to submit the materials for verification, and appointed an independent communication specialist to evaluate Arthur. It was not the victory Naomi wanted, but it was the first time in 6 weeks that Arthur's condition would be examined without Leonard deciding what his silence meant. As court recessed, Leonard walked past Naomi without looking at her. His face had returned to its public expression of patience and grief, but his hands were clenched hard enough that the skin around his knuckles had turned pale. Naomi watched him leave and felt no satisfaction yet. The red seal had not proved anything. It had only bought time, and time was exactly what Leonard had been trying to steal. The 48 hours that followed were the longest Arthur had spent without Leonard controlling the story told about him. For the first time since the stroke, people entered his room without first asking Leonard whether the visit was necessary. The independent specialist appointed by Judge Cole was Dr. Alina Mercer, a neuropsychologist whose work focused on assessing decision-making ability in people with aphasia, traumatic brain injury, and other communication disabilities. She did not arrive with a stack of rapid-fire verbal questions and a stopwatch. She arrived with a tablet, written options, visual scales, financial summaries formatted in plain language, and the patience to let silence mean thought rather than failure. Dr. Mercer spent nearly 4 hours with Arthur over 2 sessions. She asked him to identify people he trusted, explain the purpose of his major holdings, recognize the difference between selling an asset and granting someone control over it, and indicate whether he understood the consequences of a guardian voting his shares. She used yes or no confirmation methods, written keywords, picture-supported questions, and repeated checks to make sure a gesture was not being misunderstood. Arthur was slow. Sometimes he became exhausted and had to stop. Sometimes a word appeared on his screen only after several attempts, but the substance of his answers was consistent. He knew the value of his principal assets. He knew the proposed Horizon Vale transaction. He recognized Leonard's role in it. He understood that a guardian could make choices he did not want. And when asked whether he wanted Leonard to control his health decisions or voting shares, Arthur rejected that choice with a clarity that no one in the room could honestly misread. That conclusion did not end the case. Leonard's lawyers argued that capacity could fluctuate and that the complexity of a corporate sale required more than basic understanding. They suggested that Arthur's refusal of Leonard was emotional, influenced by Naomi, and not a reason to leave important decisions unprotected. Their strategy was subtle. They no longer needed to prove Arthur was completely unaware. They only needed to persuade the judge that fear and complexity justified taking control away from him. Daniel began with the independent report. He walked the court through the difference between speech impairment and impaired reasoning. He emphasized that Arthur did not need to prove that he could speak like he had before the stroke. He needed only to show that he could understand and communicate decisions through methods appropriate to his condition. The law was not supposed to reward people for refusing to provide the support that would allow a disabled person to be heard. Leonard's attorney attacked the report carefully. He pointed to Arthur's fatigue. He questioned whether visual aids had made the answers too simple. He noted that Dr. Mercer had met Arthur after Naomi raised concerns, implying that the entire evaluation had been shaped by a former employee's agenda. He tried to turn every accommodation into proof of manipulation. Dr. Mercer did not become defensive. She explained that accommodations did not put thoughts into Arthur's mind. They removed barriers that prevented other people from hearing thoughts already there. She explained that a person using glasses was not being coached to see, and that a person using an interpreter was not being coached to speak. The same principle applied to supported communication. At first, Dr. Vale appeared confident. He had years of clinical experience and a respected private practice. His original assessment was concise, formal, and built around familiar categories. Arthur had failed to answer certain verbal questions quickly. He had struggled to repeat phrases. He had become frustrated during testing. Dr. Vale had concluded that these failures indicated substantial cognitive decline. Daniel did not accuse him of lying. Instead, he asked what methods he had used to distinguish aphasia from loss of executive function. Dr. Vale acknowledged that he had not used a communication board, written choice assessment, extended response time, or consultation with a speech-language specialist. He said the setting had been urgent and that he relied on professional judgment. Daniel then asked whether Leonard's office had arranged the assessment and whether Leonard had remained nearby during portions of the examination. Dr. Vale said yes. He explained that Leonard had been concerned about Arthur's agitation and wanted the process completed quickly. The next question changed the air in the room. Daniel asked whether Dr. Vale had disclosed a consulting agreement between his clinic and Northwatch Strategies. The agreement had been found in documents produced after the court ordered a limited financial disclosure. It was not a direct payment for the guardianship opinion. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Northwatch had retained Dr. Vale's clinic months earlier to provide executive wellness consulting for a future transition project. The work had not yet begun in any meaningful way, but the contract promised a substantial fee if the Horizon Vale transaction closed. The capacity directive from the Lantern Archive showed that Leonard had known about the safeguards. The trust amendment showed he could not automatically control Arthur's shares if he stood to gain from a pending transaction. But Leonard continued to deny that he had any personal interest in the Horizon Vale sale. He claimed Northwatch was an outside consultant chosen by the buyer. He claimed he had no ownership in it, no promised payment, and no reason to want the vote outcome beyond the good of the company. Then Daniel introduced the records obtained through the court-supervised review of Ren Meridian's transaction files. They were not sensational documents. There was no single email in which Leonard confessed to stealing from Arthur. There was no recording of him laughing about his uncle's stroke. The truth arrived in the way real financial deception often arrived, through dates, signatures, spreadsheets, and words that had been chosen too carefully. The first document was an early draft of the Horizon Vale term sheet. In its original form, Northwatch was listed as an independent transition advisor. In a later version, a small notation appeared in the payment schedule. It referred to an incentive allocation for a beneficial participant identified only by initials. Daniel displayed a separate compliance questionnaire signed by Leonard during negotiations. On that form, Leonard had answered that he had no direct or indirect financial interest in any outside party connected to the transaction. The initials in the incentive schedule matched Leonard's full legal name. Leonard's attorney objected immediately. He argued that initials were ambiguous. Daniel agreed that, standing alone, they could mean many things. He then introduced a second document, a private side letter between Northwatch and a holding company called Hale Family Ventures. The holding company was not listed on Ren Meridian's public disclosures, but corporate registration records showed that it was controlled by a trust established for Leonard's children. The side letter promised that if the sale closed, Hale Family Ventures would receive a percentage of Northwatch's success fee. The payment would not go directly into Leonard's personal account. would flow through a family trust designed to make the connection difficult to see at a glance. That was not merely a conflict of interest. It was the exact type of indirect financial benefit Arthur's trust amendment had been created to prevent. Leonard's expression did not collapse. He was too disciplined for that. But the rhythm of his composure changed. He began consulting with his lawyer more often. He stopped looking at Arthur. And for the first time, the people who had believed his story could see the outline of the trap he had built. Daniel continued. The next record showed that the guardianship petition had been prepared using information from a draft proxy package. The proxy package was dated 4 days before Leonard filed in court. It assumed that someone other than Arthur would control his voting shares at the upcoming board meeting. It did not name Leonard directly, but the instructions matched the authority he sought in the guardianship petition. Leonard had not simply responded to a medical crisis. He had begun arranging the corporate consequences of Arthur's incapacity before a judge had ever examined whether Arthur was incapable. Judge Cole asked whether there was evidence Leonard had discussed the proxy plan before Arthur's stroke. Daniel said there was not. He did not exaggerate. The court could not punish a man for plans that had not been proven. But the sequence after the stroke was enough to show urgency of a different kind. Leonard had treated Arthur's illness as an opportunity before he treated it as a human tragedy. At that point, the county records officer was called forward with the final red-sealed folder from the Lantern archive. The procedure was slow by design. The officer identified the accession number, confirmed the court order, and described the condition of the seal. Daniel and Leonard's counsel examined it. Judge Cole asked whether either party disputed that the seal had remained intact since it was placed in county custody. Neither did. When the officer broke the wax, the sound was quiet. It was not the sound of a dramatic weapon being drawn. It was the sound of a barrier giving way after years of pressure. Yet every person in the courtroom heard it, because Leonard had spent the entire case trying to make sure that folder remained closed. Inside was a memorandum prepared jointly by Arthur and Beatrice 7 years earlier, along with a notarized statement from the attorney who had advised them at the time. The memorandum described an incident involving blank proxy forms and a proposed transfer of authority. Leonard had approached Arthur during a period of illness following surgery and urged him to sign documents that would allow Leonard to act quickly in corporate matters. Arthur had refused after reading the papers. Beatrice had been disturbed enough to insist on a written record. The memorandum did not claim Leonard had committed a crime then. It stated that Arthur believed Leonard had minimized the scope of the proxy forms and had become angry when asked to wait for independent counsel. Because the family chose not to make the matter public, the documents had been stored in the Lantern archive as part of Arthur's future capacity planning. Attached to the memorandum was a statement of intent signed by Arthur. It said that if any future health condition limited his speech or mobility, he wanted the people around him to distinguish between inability to perform quickly and inability to decide. It stated that he did not want Leonard appointed as guardian, proxy, conservator, or controller of his voting shares without an independent review, particularly if Leonard could benefit from a company transaction. Leonard had signed an acknowledgement that he had received notice of this statement. That signature was the moment his defense became almost impossible to sustain. For weeks, he had told the court he believed he was the natural person to take charge, because Arthur had never expressed any other preference. He had sworn that he knew of no binding instructions limiting his role. Now the court had certified documents showing that he knew exactly what Arthur wanted, and had been warned years earlier that he was not to use illness as a path to control. The damage went beyond the guardianship case. It reached his credibility in every statement he had made under oath. Judge Cole did not rush to pronounce judgment. She reviewed the materials, asked questions about dates, and gave Leonard's attorney time to respond. The lawyer argued that the old memorandum reflected a family disagreement, not a legal finding. He argued that Leonard's signature on an acknowledgement did not mean he remembered every provision years later. He argued that his client's concern for Arthur could still be genuine, despite an undisclosed financial interest. Some of those arguments were not absurd. That was what made the case important. Justice did not require pretending that every difficult family conflict had a simple villain. It required looking at the entire pattern. The pattern was what condemned Leonard. Arthur's speech had been impaired, but he had been denied meaningful accommodations. Leonard had sought emergency control at the exact moment Arthur's shares mattered most. Leonard had withheld capacity safeguards that named him as a conflicted party. His doctor had failed to disclose a financial relationship connected to the transaction. A hidden family trust stood to profit from the sale. And the sealed record established that Leonard had been warned years earlier that Arthur feared exactly this kind of pressure. Taken together, it was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. Before Judge Cole issued her decision, she asked Arthur whether he wished to make his own preference known. Arthur's communication tablet rested on the table in front of him. Dr. Mercer sat nearby but did not touch it. Arthur looked at the screen for a long time. His left hand moved slowly, selecting letters one by one. He paused. He deleted a letter. He began again. No one hurried him. No one interpreted the silence for him. For the first time since his stroke, the entire room waited for Arthur at Arthur's pace. When he finished, Dr. Mercer verified the message with him using a second method. Arthur confirmed that he did not want Leonard to make decisions for him. He confirmed that he wanted independent assistance while recovering. And he confirmed that he wanted the housing division protected until he could participate fully in any decision affecting it. The meaning was simple. Arthur had never asked to be rescued from his own life. He had asked to be heard. Judge Cole denied Leonard's petition for emergency guardianship. She found that Arthur had demonstrated decision-making capacity with appropriate supports, and that Leonard's undisclosed financial interests created a serious conflict. She ordered that no one could exercise authority over Arthur's personal voting shares without further court approval. She directed the parties to implement a supported decision-making plan, including access to independent medical, legal, and communication professionals. She also ordered the record transmitted to the appropriate authorities for review of possible false statements in the guardianship petition, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and financial misconduct connected to the proposed transaction. The order did not declare Leonard guilty of crimes. It did something more immediate and more devastating. It removed his ability to hide behind the appearance of concern. The court had not sent him away in handcuffs. There was no satisfying instant punishment, no sudden collapse under flashing cameras. Leonard left the courtroom surrounded by lawyers, his face pale and controlled. But the world he had built depended on people believing that he was trustworthy. That belief had been broken in public by the very process he had tried to use as a weapon. The consequences unfolded over the following months. Ren Meridian's board placed Leonard on administrative leave while an independent investigation began. Several directors who had accepted his version of events admitted that they had not asked enough questions about Arthur's condition or the Horizon Vale proposal. The sale was halted. The company's compliance office discovered that Northwatch had been included in internal planning long before it had been properly disclosed. Investigators traced the expected success fee through Hale Family Ventures and found additional communications showing that Leonard had pressed staff to speed the guardianship filing before the board vote. Dr. Vale faced a separate professional review. His report was not treated as worthless simply because it was inconvenient. Medical errors and conflicts needed evidence, not anger. But reviewers concluded that he had failed to use appropriate methods for a patient with aphasia and had not disclosed a material financial connection. His opinion was formally withdrawn from the guardianship case, and his clinic lost several institutional contracts that depended on public trust. Leonard's legal troubles took longer, as real legal troubles often did. Financial records had to be examined. Witnesses had to be interviewed. Lawyers argued over intent, disclosure rules, and the difference between poor judgment and criminal deception. But the investigation did not disappear. It grew. And the same careful documentation Leonard had believed he could control became the trail that followed him. Arthur did not return overnight to the man he had been before the stroke. Recovery was uneven. Some days, speaking remained exhausting. Some days, he grew angry at the patience his new life required. But the difference was that no one used those difficult days as permission to take away his choices. With Dr. Mercer's support, Arthur learned new communication tools. He began attending shortboard sessions remotely, reviewing materials in advance, and responding through a combination of typed notes, visual summaries, and scheduled breaks. The first time he voted against reopening negotiations with Horizon Vale, he did so slowly and unmistakably. The board secretary recorded the vote. No one called it confusion. He also made a decision that surprised many people. Instead of simply preserving the housing division under his personal control, Arthur transferred a significant share of it into a community benefit structure. Employees, tenant representatives, and an independent public interest board received defined oversight roles. The arrangement did not solve every problem. It did not turn a corporation into a perfect institution, but it made it harder for one ambitious executive to sell a mission built by thousands of people without answering to those people. Naomi refused the public attention that came afterward. Reporters tried to describe her as a hero, but she disliked the word. Heroes, she thought, were often used to make ordinary responsibility sound extraordinary. She had only done what her work had taught her to do: preserve what mattered, ask what was missing, and refuse to let a person be erased because listening required effort. Arthur asked her to return to Ren Meridian, not as an assistant and not as a symbolic employee. He offered her the role of director of the newly expanded Lantern Archive and its companion advocacy program. The program would help families understand supported decision-making, protect older adults from financial exploitation, and teach organizations how to communicate with people whose disabilities made them easy to dismiss. Naomi accepted only after insisting on one condition. The program could not exist merely to polish the company's image. It had to serve people who had no connection to Ren Meridian and no ability to repay the help. Arthur agreed. A year later, the Lantern Center opened in a restored building near the old factory. Its walls held photographs of workers, copies of historical agreements, and shelves of records that many executives would once have called obsolete. There were meeting rooms for families, legal clinics staffed by volunteers, communication resources for stroke survivors, and a quiet reading room where Naomi kept Beatrice's brass paperweight beneath a glass case. Arthur attended the opening. He spoke only a few words, each one hard-earned. But he did not need many. The people in the room waited for him. That was the difference. Naomi stood near the archive room afterward and watched a young woman help her grandfather use a tablet to fill out a form. The older man took his time. No one reached for the device to answer in his place. No one called him confused because the silence lasted longer than expected. Naomi thought about the first morning in court, when Leonard had tried to make her look like the problem. He had underestimated her because her work was quiet. He had underestimated Arthur because his speech was slow. He had underestimated records because he believed power belonged to whoever held the microphone. But truth did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waited in a sealed box. Sometimes it lived in a forgotten signature. Sometimes it survived because an ordinary person refused to throw away what others wanted erased. The lesson of Arthur Wren's case was not that every wealthy family hid a villain behind a polished smile. It wasn't that illness always revealed betrayal. The deeper lesson was that dignity depends on more than the ability to speak quickly, look powerful, or defend yourself in the language others expect. A person can be silent and still be certain. A person can be disabled and still deserve control over their own life. And whenever someone insists that another human being is too weak to be heard, we should ask who benefits from the silence. Because the most dangerous people are not always the ones who shout. Sometimes they are the ones who speak softly while reaching for someone else's voice. And sometimes, all it takes to stop them is one person willing to preserve the truth until the moment the world is finally ready to listen.